Hello everyone, and welcome to another Iceberg. Today we'll be tackling the Punisher Iceberg, in celebration of Punisher One Last Kill, and Punisher's upcoming appearance in Spider-Man Brand New Day. With these appearances and a brand new Punisher comic run being released, it's a pretty good time to be a Punisher fan. Now, I've already talked about some topics related to the Punisher in other videos, so I won't be talking about these topics in this video. Go check out these videos if you want to hear more about them. If you end up liking the video, drop a like and comment about your favorite entry. It helps me out a ton, and it's free. Also, if you're on mobile, do the hype thing. I used to get the hype things. I haven't really been showing up lately, so I don't know what that is, but it helps. I've also got channel memberships if you're interested. For $5, you get your name read at the very end of the video, and extended previews for Iceberg videos. And for $7, you get all of that, plus every video of mine released early. Got plenty of more icebergs on the way, so stay tuned. Without further ado, let's begin. Punisher becomes the leader of the Hand. In Punisher Issue 1, released in March of 2022, Punisher joins the Hand, and actually sticks with them for well over a year. One day, the Hand showed up and were like, "Hey Frank, wanna join us?" And by ask, I mean they showed up and tried to kill Frank. Upon killing all the assassins, Frank reluctantly joined the Hand, upon being shown something that I'll talk about a bit later. But why did the Hand want him to join in the first place? Well, they wanted a new leader, somebody who could wield the powers of the Fist of the Beast. The Beast being a demon the Hand worships. And as a member of the Hand, he began to develop powers, as he became more and more corrupted by the Beast. Though he still stuck to his classic assortment of heavy weaponry for the most part. He even tried to use his guns against Ares. You know, the god of war, that Ares. That worked out as well as you would think, as Ares literally beat Frank to an inch of his life. Luckily for Frank, the Hand rescued him, and the powers of the Beast healed him. This is when Daredevil showed up and was just like, "Frank, what the hell are you doing? These guys are very clearly evil." And Frank was just like, "Nah man, don't worry about it." So Daredevil attempted to stop Frank by force, and after a huge battle between he and Frank's forces, neither side really won. Punisher rode a dragon into battle, so that's pretty neat. He would also get his revenge on Ares, with Frank straight up killing him. And since he was able to kill Ares, that means that he could pretty much kill just about anyone. So he and the Hand began attacking criminals and terrorists across the globe, which, of course, caught the attention of many of the Marvel heroes. Frank also began to snap out of the Beast's influence, as during one of these missions, he almost killed a kid. But of course, the Beast wasn't gonna let Frank go that easily, so it took the efforts of Doctor Strange, Black Widow, Moon Knight, Captain America, and Wolverine to free him from the Beast. Except, they failed. And after being captured by the heroes, Frank used up his powers and teleported himself to the dimension Weird World to spend the rest of his days in peace. Well, okay, it wasn't actually in peace, it's Weird World, but he was no longer under the influence of the Beast, so, you know, that's good. As for Frank's powers, when he was the leader of the Hand, he had the ability to shoot out demonic energy, and even embed said energy into items. He could also shoot fire, had superhuman strength, heal himself, teleport, and even fly. Eminem Meets the Punisher. Released in June 2009, Eminem the Punisher Kill You, also known as Eminem Meets the Punisher, is one of the most infamous comic book crossovers ever made. This is because, well, what do you think? It's the rapper Eminem teaming up with the Punisher. And this wasn't an organic crossover. This wasn't the result of some writer thinking that this was a cool idea. No, the comic was produced exclusively to promote the album Relapse by Eminem. The first 8 pages were released in an issue of XXL magazine, with the rest being a free download on Marvel Unlimited. The story begins with Punisher attempting to take out Eminem right after a concert. And he would have succeeded if not for Barracuda, who showed up to save Eminem. Turns out, Barracuda is Eminem's childhood friend, and wants to team up with him to kill the Punisher. So the two actually defeat Punisher, only for Barracuda to reveal that he was only using Eminem to help him defeat Punisher, and his main goal this entire time was to actually kill Eminem. Punisher wasn't actually ever trying to kill Eminem, he showed up trying to protect him, but since Eminem's guards pulled their guns on Frank, did Punisher stuff. Anyways, it turns out that the Parents Music Council had hired Barracuda to kill him, because he was corrupting the youth with his music. So Barracuda attempts to kill Eminem, only for the Punisher to get back up and fight him. Eminem then takes a chainsaw from a fan of his and uses it to save Punisher, who's actually losing the fight against Barracuda. And, yes, Eminem actually ends up killing Barracuda with said chainsaw. Punisher then heads off to the Parents Music Council to slaughter them all, and Eminem's just like, "Tell him Shady sent ya." Yeah, man, I'm sure Frank did. This comic is widely considered one of the worst crossovers Marvel has ever produced, with the main criticisms being the writing and subject matter. I mean, Barracuda and Eminem being childhood friends, Eminem killing Barracuda with a chainsaw. Come on now, this is stupid. Punisher Season 3. The Punisher Netflix series only lasted 2 seasons, but that wasn't the original plan. The series' showrunner, Steve Lightfoot, had ideas for a 3rd season of the series, with the final scene of Season 2 meant to tease that in the next season, Frank would be fully the Punisher. No more of this, should he be the Punisher, should he just retire stuff that was a big part of the first 2 seasons. Lame it took him 26 episodes to solve that issue, but whatever. Unfortunately for the Punisher, that 3rd season never came. But not because Netflix canceled the show. No, it's because Netflix canceled the entirety of their Marvel lineup. This was because of a number of factors, including Disney Plus starting up, and Netflix wanting to cut the budgets of their more expensive licensed shows. Luckily, Frank would show up again in Daredevil Born Again, where he finally got to go all out being the Punisher, before questioning whether or not he should be the Punisher again in One Last Kill. Really? We're doing this again? Okay. Anyways, what was this 3rd season going to look like? Well, we know that this 3rd season would have taken Punisher back to New York City, and Timo Giajanto was looked at to direct some of the 3rd season, and he really wanted to use Barracuda. And according to him, Marvel didn't say no, so it's very likely that Barracuda would have been the main antagonist to the 3rd season, and that's pretty much all we know. Lynn Michaels. First appearing in Punisher Warzone Issue 7, released in July of 1992, Lynn Michaels is a former police officer who worked for the NYPD. In her years working there, she came to the conclusion that the NYPD were corrupt beyond repair, and were just really bad at their jobs in general. For example, they continued to fail to capture a sex criminal, so she decided to take matters into her own hands, and to try to debate the criminal out so that she could arrest him. But things started to get out of hand, and a Punisher had to step in and save her, though the criminal would get away, which would lead to Lynn and Punisher meeting up again a few months later to finally arrest the guy. And by arrest, I mean Punisher does his thing. It's here that Lynn begins to develop feelings for Frank, and becomes one of his key allies in the NYPD. Though she wouldn't stay with the NYPD for much longer, as she would take part in an arrest of a man named Clyde Durkin. She and the rest of the force believed that he was just a thief. But while in his home, they quickly discovered that this dude is actually a serial killer who targeted children. So he should be locked up for life or put on death row, right? Well, no. Because of some warrant issues, he couldn't be charged with those crimes, and that was the breaking point for Lynn, so she bailed, but not before murdering Durkin in his cell. It's here that she became a violent vigilante like Frank, even calling herself the Punisher, though she's also gone by Lady Punisher. She would work as a vigilante for a bit alongside fellow Punisher ally Eddie Dyson, more on him later, but would eventually retire from this life of killing, not because she was like, "This is wrong, killing is bad." No, she finds Frank's journal after she believes he's dead, and she finds out that he didn't really think too much about her, as she's not even mentioned once in it. So she gives up on the vigilante lifestyle and goes off to live a normal life. Though she wouldn't live a normal life forever, as in the aftermath of Civil War, she joined up with S.H.I.E.L.D. to take out bad guys. Not only was she cool with killing her targets, but she would do literally anything to get the job done. She would run into Frank again while on a deep undercover operation to take down Jigsaw. But during this operation, she had to do some very questionable things, which led to her feeling pretty guilty over everything. So in order to make amends, she had Jigsaw killed, which led to her being arrested by S.H.I.E.L.D. And she hasn't been seen since. Jigsaw didn't actually die, by the way. As for her powers, she doesn't have any. She's just a pretty good fighter and uses guns. Get ready to hear that a lot. Punisher tries to kill people for littering and running red lights. While the Punisher is known for killing murderers, serial killers, drug traffickers, terrorists, cartel members, hate groups, and sex criminals, that wasn't always the case. In Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man issue 82, released in June of 1983, Punisher goes gaga and starts blasting his guns at literally everyone. This includes people who litter and people who run past red lights. Well, people who run past red lights trying to get away from the gunfire caused by the Punisher. Now, Frank justifies this rampage by claiming that one crime will just lead to another crime. Basically, if you jaywalk, that means you're capable of committing other crimes like murder, bioterrorism, and genocide. So if you commit any petty crime, Punisher is gonna kill you. At least, here he will. Obviously, this is Punisher's beliefs cranked up to 1,000. He doesn't normally think this. He's only acting like this here because he was recently drugged by Jigsaw as part of a scheme to drive him crazy, which, in theory, would then lead to him acting reckless and would get himself killed. Which he very nearly did, as he went after the Kingpin, and Kingpin pretty easily annihilated Frank. So while it's funny to say that Punisher tried to kill people for littering and stuff, he only did that while he was drugged. It wasn't really him. Cancelled a sequel to the 2004 film. During the development of the 2004 film, The Punisher, Lionsgate and Marvel were playing with the idea of creating a sequel to the film if it did well. And so, the film was released in April of 2004, where it did not do well. The film was a box office disappointment and wasn't well received by critics, though general audiences were a lot kinder to the film, to the point where when the film was released on DVD in September of that year, it sold 1.8 million copies within the first 5 days, and generated $10.8 million in video rentals. So audiences seemed to really like the film, which in turn convinced Marvel and Lionsgate to go ahead with their sequel plans, despite the poor box office performance. And so, a few years later, The Punisher 2 did not come out. So why was The Punisher 2 cancelled? It ultimately ended when Thomas Jane, Punisher's actor, dropped out of the project due to the film's budget being cut and creative differences. These creative differences and budget cuts were most likely the result of the film's troubled production. Jonathan Hensley, who directed the 2004 film, was set to write the sequel, and he completed a draft of the script in June 2005, titled The Punisher Warzone. The film would have begun with Frank in Texas killing a pair of brothers who just so happened to be murderers who escaped from prison. Frank would then travel to New York City, where he'd break into a gangster meeting and kill almost everyone. The only survivor would be a dude named Billy Russo. Yep, Jigsaw was going to be the villain of the film. After surviving the attack, Billy would decide that it was time to clean house, so he could become the big bad gangster in New York City. So he starts sending Frank some info about gangster hideouts and meetups, which results in Frank doing his thing. But Frank eventually catches on to Billy's plan and brutally beats Billy, leaving him for dead. So Billy becomes Jigsaw and swears vengeance on Frank. So Jigsaw goes crazy mode, and New York City is turned into a war zone.
He said it! He said it!
This ultimately comes to an end when Punisher and Jigsaw battle each other inside of a Walmart, ending with Jigsaw dying. Now, Jigsaw wasn't going to be the only villain of the film. Throughout the film, we would cut to Father Hector Redondo, aka the Holy, as he chilled out at his church. And by chilled out, I mean he would kill criminals who would come asking for forgiveness. This would get resolved in a mid-credits sequence where Frank would show up to the church to kill him. The last thing that I'll mention about the film's plot is that the film was going to give Frank a love interest, an FBI agent named Stevie West. Lionsgate and/or Marvel didn't like the script, so Hensley left the project. To make matters worse, the film never had a director. John Dahl was almost going to direct the film, but he had issues with the script, and like Thomas Jane, he hated the fact that the film's budget was being cut. So he refused to direct. Director Walter Hill would eventually step in and offer to direct the film, only to be turned down. So after all of that, Thomas Jane left, and the project was dead. So Lionsgate instead decided to reboot the Punisher film series, which resulted in the film Punisher Warzone, which doesn't share anything in common with the 2005 Warzone script, outside of Jigsaw being the main villain. Dirty Laundry. Released in July of 2012, The Punisher Dirty Laundry is an official fan film. Let me explain. The film takes place a few years after the 2004 film, with Thomas Jane reprising the role as Punisher. The film follows him as he tries to get his laundry done, only for him to see some gang members causing trouble. So he decides to stop doing his laundry and brutally beats the gang leader and kills the rest of his gang, leaving him covered in alcohol. A woman that the gang was attacking earlier then finishes the gang leader off by lighting him on fire. Punisher then leaves with his laundry, but drops a shirt. A kid who was being harassed by the gang earlier picks it up for him, but Frank tells him to keep it. Frank then leaves, and the kid gets to keep this Punisher shirt, which has more than likely been worn during a 12.5 killings, making this shirt a piece of evidence in a whole bunch of cases. This short was not made by Marvel or Lionsgate, and is officially a fan film. However, because of the fact that Thomas Jane reprises his role as the Punisher, and the fact the film also features a big-time actor, that being Ron Perlman, many people consider this film to be an official sequel of sorts. But again, I need to stress this. Technically, the film isn't canon to the 2004 film, because it's not technically official. That being said, I do consider this film to be canon to the 2004 film, because it just makes sense. Finn Cooley. First appearing in Punisher Max issue 7, released in June 2004, Finn Cooley doesn't live in Earth 616, though honestly I'm sure a variant of him does exist in Earth 616. After all, it was recently revealed that Barracuda exists in Earth 616, in Punisher Red Band issue 4. But anyways, back to Finn. From the late 1980s to the early 90s, Finn was a member of the IRA and was arrested in 1993. Now you might be wondering, how was he arrested? Well, it's pretty simple. During an attack on a police station, the bomb that he was planting went off early, causing most of his face to be literally blown off. So he was arrested for murder and terrorism, but was released from prison in 1999 as part of the Good Friday Agreement. This really isn't the place to learn about the history of the IRA and the Troubles, so I suggest you research these topics on your own if you're interested. Anyways, because he was so disfigured from the bomb, Finn wore a plastic mask over most of his face, and you'd think after all of this, he would retire from doing crime. But no, he'd continue. Shortly after his release from prison, he moved to the United States, where he became a weapons and drug trafficker, working with a whole bunch of other criminals, including an old Irish dude named Nesbitt. Because he was so old, Nesbitt died of natural causes. But because he was a bit kooky, he didn't let his death stop him from causing crime. When he died, he left behind $10 million and planned on giving it to his fellow criminals in order for them to stop doing crime and clean up their neck of New York City, that being Hell's Kitchen. This did not happen, as Finn and the other criminals began an all-out war against each other. Whoever was the last man standing would receive the $10 million. So of course, Punisher stepped in and started taking them out, which required Finn and Co. to suck up their pride and work together in order to survive. Finn and the others would battle Frank, and while Frank would take care of some of them, Finn and some of the others managed to survive the onslaught and find where Nesbitt had been hiding the $10 million. Except, it was all a lie. Nesbitt hated everyone he worked with and decided to troll them with the promise of $10 million. So when they got to the treasure, turns out it wasn't actually $10 million. It was actually a bomb, and Finn and company were killed. As for his powers, he didn't really have any. He's a former IRA member, so he was pretty skilled with guns, bombs, and knives. As for his appearances in media, he's appeared in the MCU and Punisher No Mercy. Frank joins Hydra because he loves Captain America. So I talked about this briefly in the Captain America iceberg, but I feel like it's important enough for me to go into further detail about it. So Frank loves Captain America. He literally idolizes him. Hell, he won't even fight him. So when a Steve Rogers from another reality replaced 616 Steve and told him that Hydra was actually pretty cool and fascism is dope, Frank went along with it and joined him. But why would Frank do this? Sure, he loves Captain America, but joining Hydra is like the complete opposite of his character. Well, it's because, well, I exaggerated for comedic effect. Frank only joined Hydra because this alternate universe Steve told him that, yeah, everything Hydra's doing is pretty evil and messed up, but once they complete their goal, he'll use the Cosmic Cube and create a perfect reality, which in turn would mean that Frank's family would be revived. So Frank was essentially tricked by Hydra, who used Frank's love for Captain America against him. This was, not a very popular decision, to put it lightly, with most Punisher fans, and honestly just Marvel fans in general, thinking that this was a really stupid decision. Maria Castle is alive. So everyone knows that the reason why the Punisher does the things he does is because he lost his wife, son, and daughter to criminals. But what if I were to tell you that his wife is actually alive? So remember how Frank joined the Hand? Well, in order to gain Frank's complete loyalty, the Hand resurrected Frank's wife, Maria Castle. They even revived her with the memories of her and her kids' deaths being erased. As briefly mentioned earlier, Frank wasn't super big on the Hand at first, but the Hand did a bit of a troll and only partially revived Maria. If Maria were to leave the Hand, she would eventually die. And Frank's not about to just abandon his wife to the Hand, so he was forced to stay with them. Now, Maria wasn't actually the biggest fan of her husband before her death, as she had actually planned on telling him that she wanted a divorce, right before she was murdered. Though she would eventually fall back in love with Frank, and wanted Frank to retire so they could just chill out and raise their family. Then she saw the graves of her children. A ton of graves. As the Hand had actually tried to revive their kids over and over again, but they kept failing, with them coming out as deformed, mutated monsters. Maria then found a room filled with recordings of Frank's kills over the years, and she wasn't exactly a fan of the whole Punisher killing hundreds, if not thousands of people thing. So she actually tried to kill Frank, and very nearly succeeded. While Frank was recovering in Doctor Strange's basement, Maria would tell Frank that she wanted nothing to do with him, and that she had taken all of his money and given half of it away to charity, while she kept the other half. She then left New York City and hasn't been seen again since May of 2023. But I'm sure we'll see her again soon, as in her final appearance, she discovered that she's actually pregnant with another one of Frank's kids. Or maybe Marvel writers will forget about this plot detail and we'll never see her or Punisher's new kid ever again. Honestly, it's like a 50-50 chance. Deleted scenes. Not every scene for a film or show that gets filmed actually ends up in the final product. Sometimes scenes and concepts thought up don't even make it to the filming process. Here's some deleted scenes involving the Punisher from his various appearances in films and shows. Though, I'll be upfront, I talked about the only 2 deleted scenes that we know about involving Punisher from the Netflix Daredevil series in the Daredevil Iceberg, and I couldn't find any info on deleted scenes from Punisher Season 2 or One Last Kill. For the 1989 film, An entire prologue sequence was cut from the film, involving Frank on a police job. Here he would battle some gangsters in a warehouse, but would be forced to let one of them go when they threatened to kill an undercover agent who was found out. The prologue would continue with Frank hanging out with his family before being called back into action to hand a dude a court summon. The prologue would then end with Frank's family being killed in a car bomb. There was also a scene deleted from the film in which Punisher's former partner, Jake, visits his new partner in the hospital. After checking in on her, he would go back to his car and then be captured. These deleted scenes can all be seen in the work print of the film that was leaked in 2003 and later legally released in 2006. For the 2004 film, the film was supposed to begin with a sequence set during the Gulf War, where we would have seen Frank taking part in a battle in Kuwait. A party at the Saints and Sinners Club in Tampa was cut. Some of the Saints would talk about how they're worried about a deal that Bobby is making, as he's going by himself without any backup. Though they're mainly worried because Howard Saint would not be happy if he found out that his son was doing something this risky. A scene of Howard Saint having a meeting in a casino was cut. He would be at the casino looking for information about Bobby's death. The meeting wouldn't go very well, but before things could escalate, Jimmy Weeks, Frank's partner in the FBI, would show up to gamble. So Howard threatens to get Weeks locked up for embezzlement if he doesn't tell them who killed Bobby. This, of course, leads to Weeks revealing that Frank was responsible. Multiple scenes of Frank getting suspicious of Weeks that he had something to do with his family's murder were cut. Frank would ask about Weeks' missing Porsche and his missing expensive watch. Weeks, having sold them to pay off his gambling debt, would get pretty anxious and leave. And finally, this Weeks subplot would come to an end, with Frank confronting Weeks in his apartment. Frank would trick Weeks into revealing that he's guilty, and then Frank would hand Weeks a single bullet and orders him to use it on himself. Devastated, Weeks reluctantly Avengers Endgames himself. All of these deleted scenes were added back into the film in the extended cut, which to this day has only ever had a DVD release. Very weird. Release it on Blu-ray, like what are you waiting for? As for Punisher Warzone, I couldn't actually find any deleted scenes for Warzone. This is most likely due to the fact that the film went through some very big production issues, as studios tend to keep pretty quiet about deleted scenes regarding projects with troubled productions. These production issues stem from the fact that Lionsgate was getting cold feet about making the film R-rated. So executives at the company battled director Lexi Alexander over making the film PG-13, which, if you've seen Warzone, you'll know that that would mean a ton of the action would have to be cut from the film, or be heavily censored. Luckily, Alexander won in the end, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were some kills in the film that were cut, as part of some compromise with Alexander, especially since she wasn't allowed to have a say in what went in the final cut. As for Punisher Season 1, the only actual deleted scene that I could find for the show was a flashback scene that would have shown Frank and Russo getting into a fight with some drunks outside of a bar. To make up for the fact that there aren't any other deleted scenes that we know about, I'll throw this in as a bonus. Claire Temple appears in every single Netflix Marvel show, except for The Punisher. That wasn't for a lack of trying, though, as the show's writers tried really hard to find a way to get Claire into the show for, at the very least, a single episode. But they ultimately decided that Claire wouldn't help somebody like Frank, so they scrapped her appearance. And finally, as for Daredevil Born Again, while not a deleted scene, there was an episode in Season 1 that was pitched but rejected. This would have been a bottle episode where most of the show's cast wouldn't appear. It would star Frank and Echo, who would meet and work together on a mission. This pitch was part of the original plan for Born Again, but was scrapped during the creative overhaul. Side note, the show's creative team did want Frank to appear in Season 2 of Born Again, but due to the special Punisher One Last Kill being greenlit, and Punisher's appearance in Spider-Man Brand New Day, plans for Punisher appearing in Season 2 were scrapped. Rachel Cole. First appearing in Punisher Issue 1, released in August of 2011, Rachel Cole was a former US Marine and lived a pretty normal life, until one day at her wedding, everything changed. Right after getting married, members of the Owls crime gang and the criminal syndicate known as the Exchange began to fight at their wedding spot, which resulted in a massacre. 29 people were killed, including her husband and her family. This woke something up in Rachel, a need for revenge. So while she recovered from her injuries, she befriended a reporter so she could learn more about the Exchange, which, by the way, is a criminal group made up of former AIM and SHIELD agents. And when she was fully healed up, she went to an Exchange meeting and began to slaughter their members. But during her attack, she realized that somebody else was attacking the Exchange at the exact same time. That, of course, being the Punisher. So the two of them decided to team up to take out the Exchange. Well, they eventually decided to. They actually didn't really get along at first, and it's only when the two meet up again that they decide to work together, though eventually Rachel would betray Frank, leading to the pair to fight, which would end with Punisher convincing her to give in completely to the whole Punisher lifestyle. And so the two eventually launch an all-out assault on the Exchange's headquarters, which leads to a whole bunch of deaths. But not just Exchange member deaths. The NYPD also shows up, and in the confusion and chaos, Rachel accidentally shoots a cop in the throat. Feeling extremely guilty, and having done everything that she's wanted to, get revenge, Rachel attempts to get the police to kill her, only for the Punisher to see this coming and goofing with her gun so that she can't actually use it to make the cops kill her. So Rachel goes to jail, only for Frank and Wolverine to break her out, and Frank convinces her to continue to do Punisher stuff. So she moves to California and basically becomes the California version of the Punisher, though she would eventually return to New York City to help Punisher stop Helmut Zemo and the Thunderbolts. So she joined Frank's own Avengers group. Yes, Frank had his own Avengers group. Well, kinda. Not really, but kinda. It's only jokingly referred to as one. It's called the Island of Misfit Toy Avengers, and consisted of Punisher, Rachel, Moon Knight, Danny Ketch, Ghost Rider, Night Thrasher, and Black Widow. And after this outing, Rachel returned to California and hasn't been seen since October of 2019. As for her powers, she doesn't have any, but she's extremely skilled with guns and knives. As for her appearances in media, she's only ever appeared in Marvel Heroes as a skin for the Punisher. Punisher 2099. First appearing in Punisher 2099 Issue 1, released in December of 1992, Jacob Gallows, aka Jake Gallows, was always destined to be a violent vigilante. No, really. He lived a relatively normal 2099 life, until one day his wife and son left him, as she had received visions of the future showing her that he would become a violent vigilante one day. Not wanting anything to do with that, she left, taking her son with her. But hey, at least Jake still had a son, like his son wasn't dead. Well, he would later join the military and die. But at least Jake went to the funeral. Oh wait, no, he missed the funeral? But hey, at least he still had his mom and brother. Okay, you know how this is gonna go. Yeah, they were killed by a gang led by Kron Stone, the son of Alchemix Vice President Tyler Stone. And his reasoning for killing them was insane. Because Kron had a horrible family life, he wanted his gang to kill every single happy family they found. Kron was arrested, but because of his connections to Alchemix, he was only ever given a fine. Jake did not like that, and so decided to take justice into his own hands, and became the new Punisher. And his first mission was, obviously, to kill Kron, and he very nearly did. And so, after he thought that he killed Kron, Jake would continue to go after criminals. Working together with his friend Matthew Axel, Jake would battle a ton of bad guys, like the Young Blades gang, a gang that flew around on flying sword hoverboards. The Aesir, a group of people genetically mutated by Alchemix to look and act like Norse gods. And the Fearmaster, a member of Alchemix and leader of a cartel group known as Cyber Nostra, who could turn human flesh into minerals like gold. Dude even turned Jake's girlfriend into a statue. He was pretty insane. Jake would even have to battle his own son, who, didn't actually die, but instead became the villain Hotwire. I should also mention that Jake was a member of Alchemex and worked in their private police force known as Public Eye. But why would he join Alchemex? Seems pretty obvious that they're the bad guys. Well, he was part of Public Eye before becoming the Punisher, but he stayed with Public Eye as his identity as the Punisher wasn't public information, so he could continue being the Punisher while working for them. He did this so he could always be one step ahead of the manhunt after him. As an agent of Public Eye, he worked with a robot named Goldheart, who was secretly a vigilante as well, known as the Gold Ghoul. Unfortunately for Goldheart, Public Eye found out about him and gave him two options: be destroyed or be reprogrammed. Seeing as he'd rather die than be reprogrammed, Goldheart allowed himself to be destroyed. But Jake decided to save Goldheart and kept a copy of his programming, placing it inside of his motorcycle. Jake would eventually leave Public Eye and joined up with S.H.I.E.L.D. But S.H.I.E.L.D. 2099 is a lot different from the normal S.H.I.E.L.D., as this S.H.I.E.L.D. was Dr. Doom 2099's personal police force. So Jake became the leader of Doom's fascist police force known as the Punishment Police, and worked to keep the United States, quote-unquote, safe. Around this time, Max stopped working with Jake, as he believed that he was too far gone. So in order to stop him, Max took Goldheart's programming out of the motorcycle and rebuilt him to kill Jake. While Goldheart wasn't able to actually kill Jake, he took Goldheart and Max betraying him very hard, so he started acting crazier than usual. And when Doom 2099 saw this, he was just like, "Dude, that's pretty cringe," and ordered for Jake to be killed. But Jake was able to get away, and he went into hiding before returning to track down Kron again after learning that he was still alive. Jake's story would eventually come to an end when he was plucked from his reality by the Elders of the Universe, who grabbed him as part of the Contest of Champions, a multiversal battle royale gladiator fight where the Elders would have champions from across the multiverse fight for them, and whoever wins would get an ISO spear, an insanely powerful artifact that allows those who wield it to warp reality to their will. Jake did really well in this contest, and was able to convince the Grandmaster to let him work for him legit. So Jake became the dude who chose Grandmaster's champions for him. But this was all part of a scheme by Jake, who was working with an alternate universe maestro to overthrow the Elders of the Universe. But this partnership didn't last, as Jake quickly decided that he didn't really like Maestro, and so Maestro killed him. Except, not really. After all of this, Jake was shot in the head by an alternate universe Frank Castle, who was one of the champions the pair had taken from across the multiverse. As for his powers, Jake had cybernetic implants, like a robotic right arm, which gave him super strength. Think the Winter Soldier's arm, but more advanced. He also had a ton of different gadgets, like a face scrambler device that hacked into people's eyes so that they couldn't see his face. He's also got an exosuit of sorts underneath his armor, which has multiple combat styles programmed into it. As for his appearances in media, he's appeared in Marvel Contest of Champions, Avengers Academy, and Marvel Rivals. 90s cartoon censorship. So the Punisher is a rather violent character. After all, this is a dude who kills people on a near daily basis. So because of that, he hasn't really appeared too much in cartoons, as in order to get him to work in these shows, he would need to be censored pretty heavily. For example, for his brief Superhero Squad show appearance, in which Ray Stevenson reprised the role, instead of being obsessed with killing criminals, he was obsessed with destroying vegetables.
We're nothing but white blood cells, hunting the infection called crime, a sickness that sneaks in through the cracks, the way that Brussels sprouts sneak onto a plate of delicious macaroni and cheese.
But his most notable appearance in cartoons has to be his appearance in the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s. Appearing in 3 episodes, 2 in Season 2 and 1 in Season 4, Punisher received some very heavy censorship. Keep in mind, this is the show that changed the name of the Sinister Six to the Insidious Six, because the word sinister was too scary. So obviously they were going to hit Punisher pretty hard with censorship. Instead of using bullet-based weapons and killing people, he's way more sci-fi tech-heavy in the show, using exclusively energy weapons and non-lethal weaponry throughout his 3 appearances. The battle van is also far more advanced than it usually is, and Frank's got his very own jetpack. But hey, despite these censorships, they made him work. Punisher kills the Marvel Universe. Released in December of 1995 and written by Garth Ennis, Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe is a one-shot comic about, well, I mean, the title kinda gives it away. In this reality, instead of his family being killed by criminals, his family were killed when they were caught in the middle of a fight between the Avengers, X-Men, and some Skrulls. Frank instantly snapped upon seeing his family being killed, and decided then and there to start killing, with Hawkeye, Cyclops, and Kitty Pryde being his first victims. He was then taken down by the remaining heroes and sent to jail, but that's when an old man named Kesselring showed up and got Frank out of jail. See, Kesselring hated superhumans, as he had once been your average rich dude until he got caught up in a fight between the Fantastic Four and Dr. Doom. And during this fight, Doom threw Human Torch onto Kesselring, which gave him like 20th degree burns. So he began to travel the globe, gathering people to help him kill all superhumans. And Frank was just the guy he needed to be the trigger man. Wait, a Garth Ennis comic about a guy who wants to kill all superhumans? Why does that sound familiar? Anyways, Frank agreed to an alliance, and was given all the funds and weapons he needed to go postal on the Marvel Universe. And for the next 5 years, he went around killing every single hero and villain that he could find. Dude even nuked the entirety of the X-Men, Alpha Flight, and Brotherhood of Mutants while they were fighting on the moon. And he got these nukes after he killed Dr. Doom. No matter how powerful the character was, whether they be Hulk, Ghost Rider, Thing, Green Goblin, Black Panther, Iron Man, Scarlet Spider, Spider-Man, Venom, Daredevil, or Thor, Frank killed them. Though Daredevil's death really affected Frank, as when he died, Matt revealed his identity to Frank, and told him that there was always someone behind the mask. This made Punisher realize that murdering people is wrong, so he Avengers Endgames himself. What if the Punisher had killed Spider-Man? So as most people know, Punisher first appeared as an antagonist of Spider-Man's in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 129, released in October of 1973. But what if Frank had not only fought Spider-Man, but killed him? Well, we get that question answered in What If issue 58, released in December of 1993. After killing Spider-Man using a statue of Doc Ock filled with a ton of explosives, Frank is pretty hyped, as it was a job well done. But then he figures out that Spider-Man is actually just a normal dude. He wasn't evil or anything like that. Furious at being tricked into killing a superhero, Frank decides that he's gonna get revenge on the man who hired him for the job, the Jackal. But first, he kinda needs to stay low, as literally every single superhero who lives in or lives near New York City is out looking for him. I mean, we're talking about Spider-Man being killed. If you kill Spider-Man, you're public enemy number 1 until you're eventually killed. Luckily for Frank, he has some allies, these being Doc Ock, Chameleon, Scorpion, Shocker, Kraven, Mysterio, Electro, Vulture, and the original Beetle. As you can probably guess from them all being Spider-Man villains, they were pretty hyped that Punisher had killed him, so they literally threw him a party and were like, "Hey man, we're cool, right? You're one of us." Only for Punisher to be like, "Nah," and he kills every single one of them, in part because they're all murderers, but also to try and make amends for killing Spidey. The story comes to an end when Frank eventually tracks down the Jackal, but just as he attacks Jackal, the police show up and try to stop him, so Punisher holds Jackal hostage, only for the police to tell Frank that if he kills Jackal, he's just gonna get gunned down by the police. And Frank is pretty cool with this, and so he kills Jackal, and in turn, is then killed by the police. Marvel's relationship with the Punisher symbol. Come on, you knew this was coming. In the past 15 years or so, Marvel has been a bit weird with the Punisher, but it's really not the character's fault. In the last 15 years, the Punisher symbol has been adopted by a lot of different groups, with the two biggest examples being alt-right groups and police departments. This has turned the iconic badass Punisher skull symbol from just a fun comic symbol about a crazy dude going around blasting bad guys to a very real symbol of hate, oppression, and corruption. People have an issue with these groups adopting the Punisher logo for very obvious reasons. The Punisher is a very violent character, and while he kills some really bad guys, he's also a complicated character. You're not supposed to think that he's always 100% in the right, and you're supposed to think that he's a bit crazy. So when alt-right groups adopt the symbol, it's usually taken as a sign that they want to hurt or kill LGBT people, people of color, people of different religions, and anyone politically left of them. And when it comes to cops adopting the symbol, many view this as completely tone-deaf, as the police are supposed to protect, not kill. Punisher doesn't arrest bad guys, he kills them in brutal ways. So many view cops who have this symbol on their uniform or cop car as dudes with guns on power trips. Because of this, Marvel has changed the Punisher around for quite a while in an attempt to distance him from the skull symbol. For example, the whole Punisher joining the hand thing was very clearly, at least partially, inspired by the idea of giving Punisher a completely new style, and to soft retire the character. It's been speculated that the reason why the Punisher Netflix series was so obsessed with Frank deciding on whether or not he should be the Punisher was in response to this controversy. I mean, can you name another hero in the MCU who's worn normal clothing during their fights more than their actual costume? Marvel even tried replacing Frank with a new Punisher that I'll talk about in just a second, but that failed spectacularly. Hell, some people, not at Marvel, at least I hope, thought Punisher should keep the hand symbol over his skull symbol from now on, which personally, I think is a really stupid idea because you're just surrendering the symbol to the people abusing the symbol. But luckily, it seems nowadays that Marvel agrees with me, as Punisher has been making a very strong comeback in comics, games, shows, and films. Police officers using the Punisher symbol have been directly called out by Marvel writers in both the comics and the MCU, notably Punisher issue 13, released in July 2019, and Daredevil Born Again. Punisher co-creator Jerry Conway was also very vocal over the years about how he thinks that cops using the Punisher symbol are, quote, a disgrace to serious police officers everywhere. They show an imbecilic level of irresponsibility and should be fired immediately. Thankfully, it seems that Marvel's attempts at taking back the symbol have been working. Let's hope it lasts.
We'll be right back to Marvel's Avengers Ultron Revolution on Disney XD.
Rated M for mature. Frank Castle's family was brutally murdered in a mob hit. Now for the men that did it, there is no justice. There is no mercy. This isn't vengeance. It's punishment. The Punisher.
Now back to Marvel's Avengers Ultron Revolution on Disney XD.
Joe Garrison. First appearing in Punisher issue 1, released in November of 2023, Joe Garrison was Marvel's attempt to replace Frank Castle with a cleaner version of the Punisher, one that mainly didn't use realistic firearms, but instead comic book sci-fi looking guns and energy weapons. Joe was a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. for a while and was a really good agent, but he would eventually retire to go raise a family. Sadly for Joe and his family, he made a lot of enemies while working for S.H.I.E.L.D., and one of those enemies, known as the Sokovian, found where Joe lived and killed his entire family. So Joe swore vengeance and began working with another former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, nicknamed AAA, to get said revenge. But there was a bit of an issue. Joe was suspected as being the one who killed his family, so not only did Joe have to track down the Sokovian, he also had to avoid the police, SHIELD, and the feds. It was around this time that he was being called the Punisher by the media, as I guess his suit looks vaguely like the Punisher's suit? So he decided to adopt the name and eventually found the Sokovian and killed him. He then decided that his job wasn't done yet, as he found out that the Sokovian was actually hired to kill his family. So Joe continued his mission and battled a whole bunch of bad guys like Fearmaster, Mr. Hyde, and Bushwhacker. And it's during this quest for vengeance that he realizes something, that even after he kills the man who hired the Sokovian, he's gonna keep killing criminals. So, who did order the hit on Joe's family? Jigsaw. No, not that Jigsaw. Or that Jigsaw. A new Jigsaw who's part of a giant high-tech Jigsaw criminal organization that wants to take over the world. And after Joe kills this Jigsaw, he then goes after... well, we don't know. See, Joe Garrison's solo series was insanely unpopular, so the comic was cancelled after only 4 issues, though we did see him one more time in the miniseries Daredevil Woman Without Fear, releasing from July 2024 to October of the same year. In this story, he's going after the villains Silvermane and Count Nefaria in Mandrapore, but also ends up fighting Elektra Daredevil. We have yet to see Joe Garrison again after this miniseries, and frankly, I don't think he's going to show back up for quite a while. As while he does have a fan base, he's still overall pretty unpopular, and with Marvel going all in on new Frank Castle stuff, it doesn't seem like there's any room left for Joe Garrison. I guess they could do a story where the two of them fight each other, but come on, it's either gonna end in a draw and they team up to fight a bad guy, or Frank kills him. As for his powers, Joe doesn't have any, though he's got some pretty interesting weapons, like energy nunchucks and a railgun. He's also got a... wait a second, is that a hammer burst from Gears of War? The Punisher No Mercy. Released in July 2009 exclusively on the PS3, Punisher No Mercy is a first-person shooter, and to this day, is the final Punisher video game. Punisher's been in games since, obviously, but he's never had another standalone game. Developed by Zen Studios, this game is extremely unique, in that it's an arcade shooter like Quake, but also features a lot more modern gameplay mechanics like perks. The game featured both a single-player mode and a multiplayer mode, with the latter obviously being the main attraction. After all, the campaign is literally just multiplayer matches against bots, with cutscenes in between them. It's also extremely short, as the game only launched with 4 multiplayer maps, though 4 more would be added via free DLC. As for the game's plot, it's very simple. It's just Punisher going around and taking out bad guys like Barracuda and Jigsaw. In fact, he kills a ton of Jigsaws in the final level, as a bunch of Jigsaw's goons cosplay as him while fighting Frank. Throughout the game, Frank's given support from Silver Sable, though by the end of the game she betrays him and reveals she's working with S.H.I.E.L.D., and Nick Fury, Black Widow, Dum Dum Dugan, and Inez Temple show up to arrest him, and the game ends on a cliffhanger that obviously was never going to get continued. Anyways, the game's multiplayer allowed you to play as 8 different characters. These characters being Punisher, Barracuda, Jigsaw, Micro, Finn Cooley, Bushwhacker, Silver Sable, and Jenny Cesare. More on her later. Each character also received alternate color options, and the game even received a free DLC character, that being Carlos Cruz. Also, more on him later. While not directly linked to the film or comic, the game very clearly takes heavy influence from the film Punisher Warzone, along with the comic run Punisher Max. As for the gameplay, each player could hold up to 3 weapons, and weapons could be upgraded with new attachments and damage buffs by getting kills with them, or getting upgrade power-ups located on the maps. As for the game's reception, it wasn't received very well, and sadly was delisted sometime in 2011. This makes the game insanely difficult to obtain, as it was only ever released digitally on the PS3. Luckily for those who bought the game, you can download it whenever you want to on your PS3 and still play the game's campaign and multiplayer mode via bot matches. I really wish I got to play this game back in the day. I love that micro-genre of small licensed digital-only games. Something about them just feels nostalgic. One day I'll get to play You Battle Los Angeles, the video game. One day, I swear it. Marvel Knights film series. When Punisher Warzone was released in 2008, audience members were probably a bit confused when they saw the branding Marvel Knights before the film began. Now, Marvel Knights has been a label used by Marvel since 1998, with the idea being that comics released under this branding would be more adult and serious. Daredevil, Punisher, Ghost Rider, Black Panther, Hulk, Black Widow, Elektra, and the Inhumans were the characters that received the most amount of these comics under this branding. The name Marvel Knights was even given to Daredevil's own little superhero team that had its own comic series, though in-universe it was never actually referred to as Marvel Knights. But anyways, keeping in tradition of this branding being used for more serious and graphic stories, Marvel Entertainment decided that for their more serious films, they would give them the branding Marvel Knights. And so Punisher Warzone was the first film to be given that title, and it was then used again in 2012 for Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, before being retired forever. Now, I guess I shouldn't call this a film series because Warzone was made by Lionsgate, while Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance was done by Columbia Pictures, so it's not like they were ever going to cross over. But what else can I call this? The Marvel Knights film banner? Actually, wait, that works way better as an entry name. Whatever, the point is, it was a failed experiment. The Punisher Pack and Hellfire. So these two characters, or 5 characters, are the result of Gamora collecting every soul in the universe and trapping them in the Soul Gem, and then folding the universe in half, merging 2 souls into one person. She did this in an attempt to balance the soul world, thus creating Warp World, a pocket reality where all of these merged beings lived. The first 4 characters that I'll talk about are the Punisher Pack. First appearing in Infinity Wars Infinity Warps Issue 2, released in December of 2018, the Punisher Pack is exactly what it sounds like. It's the Power Pack, but they kill people while wearing the Punisher logo. In this reality, the Power Pack's parents were killed by a crime syndicate, which led to the kids meeting an alien named Linus Whitemane, a merged version of Alfred Whitemane and Micro. And Whitemane gave the kids superpowers so that they could hunt down and kill the people who killed their parents. And after they got their revenge, they decided that they weren't going to stop at just those who killed their parents, and would continue to hunt down criminals. This really freaked Whitemane out, so he declared that he would stop them, but we never actually ever got a continuation of this story, so I don't know, maybe he won, maybe he didn't, who's to say. But this wasn't the only Punisher Warp World character. The actual Punisher's soul, Frank Castle, was merged with Damian Hellstrom, and their merged form was a man named Damian Gallows, aka Hellfire. Only appearing in Infinity Warp's Weapon Hex Issue 1, released in October of 2018, Hellfire was part of the Midnight Guns, which you might think are just the Midnight Suns, but nope. While they are obviously this universe's version of that team, they're very different, as they're actually in an occult militia group who have no issue with murdering people. Sadly, we don't really know too much else about Hellfire, as he's killed in his very first appearance, and we never get any information on his background. Most notable thing about him is the fact that his last name is the same as Punisher 2099's. Though seeing as he's a combined form of Frank Castle and Damian Hellstrom, I imagine in this universe he was just a normal dude, until his sister, who would presumably be based on Satana Hellstrom, was killed. And after that, he decided to become Hellfire, making a deal with the devil or something, I don't know. Punisher Season 2 ends during the snap. So here's an interesting little fact that the writers of Punisher Season 2 100% didn't intend, but it's nonetheless interesting. YouTuber A Bit of Everything makes a ton of videos going over the dates of Marvel and DC films. So when he covered The Punisher's Season 2 timeline placement, he discovered that the entire season takes place in May of 2018. Well, the entire season except for the final scene, as the show explicitly says that that scene takes place 3 months later, which means that this scene must take place in August of 2018. At first glance, that means absolutely nothing, but we know that Avengers Infinity War takes place at the very end of May of 2018. This means that this brief scene at the end of Punisher Season 2 was actually the first time the MCU explored the 5-year gap between Infinity War and Endgame. No, Echo's flashback scenes were not the first time that we saw what the Netflix MCU characters were doing during that time. It was actually Punisher Season 2. Now, like I said, this was most likely not intended, but since we know for a fact that the Netflix shows are hard canon to the MCU, technically this scene is set after the snap, which of course means that Frank wasn't snapped. A Man Named Frank. Only appearing in Punisher A Man Named Frank, released in June 1994, Frank was a former soldier who took part in the American-Spanish War in 1898. Upon returning home from the war, he thought that his life was going to be pretty chill from now on. Unfortunately, that's not how Punisher stories work. Soon after he left the army, his wife and 2 kids were murdered by a bunch of criminals. Frank nearly died himself as the criminals beat the crap out of him and left him to die in the middle of the desert. But Frank didn't die, and instead returned to the ruins of his home and armed himself with one thing in mind: revenge. At first, he worked as a bounty hunter and was able to track down and kill one of his family's killers. He would eventually then take up a job at a ranch owned by a man named Angus Macaulay as a gun hand, basically a security guard who protected the property and its cattle from outlaws. But while working for him, Frank discovered that this dude also ran a cattle stealing operation. Not only that, but his gang were the very same people who murdered his family. So Frank reported them to the police, and they all went to jail. And that's when Frank found out that his family didn't actually die, but were instead in comas. They then woke up and everything was A-OK. Nah, not really. Frank instead killed the entire gang and tracked down Macaulay to New York, where he'd finish him off too. Frank then decided to continue his career as the Punisher and returned to the Wild West, where he continued to kill criminals. Now what's interesting about this story is that it was originally created to be an alternate universe. Basically a what if the Punisher was a cowboy story, but years later it would be retconned into Earth 616 by a guidebook. So now there's 2 different dudes named Frank throughout history who have extremely similar histories and look pretty similar. You might think that they're related, but they're probably not, as Frank's family comes from Italy, as in the modern day Frank, not the Wild West Frank. As for his powers, he doesn't have any. He's literally just the Punisher, but a cowboy. Jennifer Cesare. First appearing in Punisher Max issue 43, released in January of 2007, Jennifer, or Jenny, was born into the Cesare crime family, and life for her was pretty solid for the most part. That was until she got married to her husband, Tim Bagato. At first glance, he seemed like a pretty chill dude, but literally on their wedding night, he revealed himself as actually being a complete pile of garbage, as he began to assault Jenny in literally just about every way imaginable. Yeah, he's scum, like actual scum. Now, Jenny was introduced to Tim by her sister Annabella and her friends, and you'd hope that they didn't know that Tim was like this beforehand, but no they did. So Jenny was pretty much alone. That was until she received a blessing. That being, the Punisher killing Tim. But everything has a cost, I guess, as while she was now free from her abusive husband, she was also diagnosed with breast cancer the exact same day. Now that Tim was dead, Jenny used her newfound freedom to do something really stupid. She believed that Tim's evil literally rubbed off on her and gave her the cancer. That, combined with how she was treated over the years from both her family and friends, she went to her sister and told her that she was going to go to the FBI to snitch on everyone. This ended exactly as you'd expect. Her sister had her kidnapped and killed. But the Chuds at the Cesare crime family failed to kill her, but thankfully for Jenny, they believed that they did. Instead of starting life anew, Jenny trained in hand-to-hand combat and firearms for the express purpose of killing everyone at the Cesare crime family, her sister included. After all of these years of training, she put her skills to the test and battled her former family, saving Punisher's life in the process. When it was all said and done, the Cesare crime family was no more, and Jenny was not happy. Out of desperation to feel literally anything, she begged Punisher, but this still didn't make her feel anything. Depressed, dying of cancer, and having no motivation to keep going, Jenny took her own life. As for her powers, she didn't have any. She's just... unless I specify that they have powers, just assume that everyone I talk about in this video doesn't have any. As for her appearances in media, she's only appeared in The Punisher: No Mercy. Cancelled Warzone sequel. As you can probably guess because of its box office performance, and the fact that the film had a very troubled production, the planned sequel to Punisher Warzone died almost immediately after the film released. Technically, a sequel was never publicly announced, though it's more than likely that it was in some form of development at one point, as Ray Stevenson was pretty confident in a sequel being made back in 2008. That, and let's be real, can you name a Marvel or DC film in the last 26 years that hasn't had some sort of sequel discussed? If this sequel was made, it's most likely that the film's villains would have either been Barracuda or the Slavers, as Ray Stevenson mentioned wanting either of them to be in the sequel. Punisher works for the Kingpin. So after all of that pesky hand stuff, Frank was living in Weird World for a while, but he would eventually return to Earth 616, just not willingly. Back in Earth 616, Kingpin found God. No, not literally found God, he just became religious after being possessed by the literal embodiment of greed. Go check out the Daredevil iceberg for that insanity. So anyways, because Fisk was still, Wilson Fisk, his newfound religious beliefs were a bit warped. He wanted to start purging New York City of the many sinful criminals that lived in it. So in order to do that, he wanted the Punisher to work for him. But of course, not only was Frank in Weird World, but he would also never work for him. So Fisk had his men travel to Weird World and capture Frank. And upon bringing him back to Earth 616, Kingpin had Punisher undergo some surgery to turn him into a living weapon. Fisk's own personal living weapon. He did this by placing a microchip into his brain that would force Frank to do anything that he ordered. But this microchip wasn't the only microchip in the story. Kingpin had Micro kidnapped and forced him to act as Frank's controller. And so, Frank became the Punisher again and went out to go kill criminals under the orders of Kingpin. And to make matters even worse, Frank lost his memories when they injected the chip into his brain. But luckily, Frank would get his memories back and would even get the chip removed. And of course, the first thing that he wants to do after getting the chip removed is to take out Kingpin, which he doesn't kill him, but he does defeat him. So, that's good enough, right? So yeah, the reason why Frank left Weird World and became the Punisher again was because Kingpin found religion. Cosmic Ghost Rider. First appearing in Thanos issue 13, released in November of 2017, you might be confused as to why I'm talking about this dude, since he's Ghost Rider, not the Punisher. Well, in actuality, he's both. This variant of Frank Castle comes from a reality in which Thanos wins. He conquers not just Earth, but the universe as a whole. And of course, Punisher was killed by Thanos, because... come on, Punisher's tough, but he's not Thanos tough. And so, when he died, his soul went to hell. But Frank wasn't done yet. he decided to make a deal with Mephisto, as Frank wanted nothing more than to kill Thanos and punish him for his countless murders. So Mephisto gave Frank the powers of Ghost Rider, but when Frank arrived back on Earth, it was far too late. The Earth was eradicated, and Thanos was long gone. Cursed with immortality, Frank wandered the dead Earth for a very, very long time, which resulted in him going insane. Luckily for Frank, Galactus eventually showed up looking for help to take out Thanos. So the two decide to team up, and they fail. But Frank is spared by Thanos, who gives him a shard of the Time Gem and orders him to bring him a version of himself from the past, aka Earth 616 Thanos, to help him kill the Fallen One, aka Super Silver Surfer, in order to make Lady Death fall in love with him. But this is all a trick, and old Thanos just wants young Thanos to kill him so that he can be with Death. But young Thanos said nah, and decided to change his actions in the present to prevent this future from happening. That's cool and all, but what about Frank? Well, Frank was defeated by the Fallen One, but was saved from going back to Hell by Earth 616 Odin, who brought him to Valhalla, only for Frank to want out, since Valhalla isn't really his thing. So he asks Odin to send him back to the past to kill baby Thanos. So Frank travels back to the past and finds baby Thanos, only to change his mind and decide to raise him instead. This doesn't end well, and I'll talk about that in just a second. After that whole thing, Frank decides to live in Earth 616 and messes with history, only for the Watcher to show up and fix all of the goofs he made to history. Frank was then thrown into the raft, where he would stay imprisoned for a while, but he would eventually escape and die, though he would return to life and start traveling around the galaxy taking out bad guys. But he would eventually retire, only for him to then be kicked back into combat when he found out that a second cosmic Ghost Rider had entered Earth 616 and was causing him some issues. Though it turns out that the second cosmic Ghost Rider was actually just him. Previously, Frank had gone through a black hole which separated him into two beings. Frank would eventually fall into yet another black hole, and a bunch of other hymns were created. In order to survive, they all realized that they needed to merge back together, so they worked together to find that second cosmic Ghost Rider and merged with him. And so, all of that multiple cosmic Ghost Rider stuff ended, except it didn't, as part of him had actually merged with a woman named Axel, who also became the cosmic Ghost Rider. As of right now, Frank continues to travel around Earth 616, helping both good guys and bad guys, joining teams like the Imperial Guardians and the Dark Guardians. As for his powers, Cosmic Ghost Rider has all of your standard Ghost Rider powers: immortality, the Penance Stare, the ability to create hellfire, create all sorts of weapons like chains and guns, superhuman strength, and durability. He also had a bunch of cosmic powers as well that he got from working with his universe's Galactus. This includes telekinesis and the ability to bring people back to life, but only those that he's killed. As for his appearances in media, he's appeared in Marvel Future Fight, Contest of Champions, Marvel Strike Force, and Marvel Cosmic Invasion. Thanos becomes the Punisher. So remember how I just said that Cosmic Ghost Rider Frank decided to change the future by raising Thanos? Well, that had some pretty interesting results. First appearing in Cosmic Ghost Rider issue 3, released in September of 2018, this Thanos became an anti-hero just like his adopted dad. He and Cosmic Ghost Rider even made sure that Earth 616's Frank Castle's family never died. Everything seemed to be going great for the two of them. That was until Thanos got a little bit annoyed that some people didn't really like his whole Punisher thing. So he killed them and took control over the Earth as a dictator. And when his dad refused to go along with all of this, Thanos killed him. So Thanos Punisher ruled over Earth. In retaliation, this universe's Cable formed his own Guardians of the Galaxy and traveled back in time to kill baby Thanos. There's just one problem with that though. Cosmic Ghost Rider adopted the baby, so they had to go through him first. Frank would ultimately defeat Cable and his Guardians, as Punisher Thanos from the future showed up to help. Wanting to show his past dad what he's been up to, he brings Frank to the future to see his empire, but as soon as Frank realizes that Thanos has become a dictator, he turns on his future adopted son, and they fight. Luckily, Frank was able to kill Punisher Thanos, and then decided to return baby Thanos back to the point in time he abducted him, in order to prevent this future from happening. As for Punisher Thanos' powers, he had most of the same abilities as Thanos from Earth-616, like superhuman strength, telepathy, the ability to fire energy out of his hands, and superhuman levels of healing. And just like the Punisher, he had a ton of giant guns and bombs that he used to punish people. What if the Punisher's family had not been killed? In What If Issue 10, released in December of 1989, we get the answer to the question, what if the Punisher's family had not been killed? Spoiler alert, they still get killed. In this reality, the Castle family is spared due to some rain ruining their picnic in the park. So they return home, and Maria doesn't tell Frank that she wants a divorce, because that was a retcon that happened decades later. Instead, Frank reveals that he's gonna become a police officer at the NYPD, and over the course of the next few months, he absolutely kills it at the police academy, all 7 of them, and on his very first day of the job, he witnesses cops collecting bribes. Turns out a whole bunch of members of the NYPD and even some judges are corrupt, and Frank's not super thrilled about this, so he snitches on his fellow officers. But unfortunately for Frank, the police captain he reported to was also corrupt, so he decides to hire some criminals to kill Frank. The criminals failed to kill Frank, but they did manage to kill his family, which led to Frank faking his death and becoming the violent vigilante known as the Punisher. What's crazy is that his captain, the very same who hired the criminals to kill him, tried giving a eulogy at Frank's funeral. Frank wasn't really cool with that, and killed him while he was giving said eulogy. Punisher continued killing corrupt officers and judges as part of his revenge. But not only that, but he also sent in evidence of their corruption to various newspapers around NYC. And so the story comes to an end with Frank still doing his thing as the Punisher, and the entirety of New York City hating the NYPD. Kurt Sutter's Punisher film. When discussing the canceled sequel to Punisher 2004, there's one name that I left out, and that's Kurt Sutter. Sutter was one of the writers who Lionsgate and Marvel had brought in to write the sequel, and so he wrote a script. Or I guess it'd be more accurate to say he rewrote a script. Too bad Lionsgate, and especially Marvel, didn't like his script. According to Sutter, he wanted to take the Punisher and his cast of characters to new pastures, saying, quote, "I didn't realize you can't take liberties with some of the characters and some of the traits, because they are what they are. They're very derivative, they're stereotyped. This is the guy who does this, and this is the guy who does this. So they're two-dimensional for a reason. That's the purpose they serve." So I was trying to expand the Marvel Universe in a direction it should not have been expanded in. I think I was trying to write to the emotionality of this dude, and motivate the absurd violence with some kind of meaning. I don't mean that I was like effing Gandhi, but I was just trying to root it in a little bit more in the mental anguish that he went through to justify it, and to take a little bit of that journey. So I think that's what I was trying to do, humanize him a little bit more, but it's the kind of thing where there's only X amount of time in the movies, so you have moments of that, but you can't really have a subplot that explores that kind of thing. Not in a summer blockbuster or Marvel picture. So basically, it seems like he wanted this film to explore Frank's justifications for being the Punisher. Something that I guess Marvel really didn't want at the time. As for what his Punisher film was going to look like, all we know is that Jigsaw was going to be the main antagonist, and that Punisher and a female police officer would have had some kind of relationship. Original casting. Just like every other film or show ever made, some actors just didn't make the cut when they auditioned for roles in Punisher-related projects. That, or they declined a role offered to them. Here's a list of some actors who either auditioned for roles, or offered roles, or were considered for roles in Punisher films and shows, but for whatever reason didn't end up getting the part. For Punisher in the 1989 film, Steven Seagal and Christopher Lambert were considered for the role. For Punisher in the 2004 film, Hugh Jackman was considered for the role. For Howard Saint, Patrick Swayze was considered for the role. For Jigsaw in Punisher Warzone, Paddy Considine and Freddie Prinze Jr. were considered for the role. For Punisher in the MCU, Louis Hertham and James Frain were considered for the role. And finally, for Micro in the MCU, Michael Nathanson was considered for the role. James Pierce. First appearing in Punisher issue 86, released in November of 1993, James Pierce, aka Jimmy Pierce, is yet another vigilante born from a crime family. This time, the Black Cullens crime family. Jimmy was never really a fan of his family, and he had a very good reason not to be, as his father had been killed by the Black Cullens. So Jimmy, like his father before him, decided to join the military out of spite for his family. Unfortunately for Jimmy, one day his family received word that the Punisher was dead. He wasn't, but they thought he was. So seeing as there was now room for a new Punisher, and Jimmy had military experience, they came to Jimmy and told him to become the new Punisher. A Punisher that was loyal to the Black Cullens, and would serve as their hitman and enforcer. But Jimmy really didn't want to be his family's puppet, so they respected his decision and threatened to kill his mom in order to get him to agree to it. And so he became the Punisher, or the Hitman Punisher, as he's often referred to as out of universe. But he didn't want to kill people, and would always try to solve things peacefully. But this almost never worked out, so he had to fight back. But he never actually killed anyone, something that other wannabe Punishers had no issue doing. And one of these other dudes who wanted to be the next Punisher had a job stolen from him by Jimmy, so he tried to get revenge on him. He attempted to murder Jimmy, which resulted in Jimmy killing him in self-defense. This really bothered Jimmy, so he was caught off guard when VIGIL showed up. VIGIL being an anti-vigilante group, and an agent of VIGIL, named Taylor Blackwell, would shoot Jimmy in the back. But luckily, he survived, and decided that enough was enough. Disgusted with his family for forcing him to become the Punisher, which in turn led to him killing a man, Jimmy decided to not get revenge. Instead, he just wanted to be left alone. Unfortunately for him, when he tried hitchhiking, the dude who picked him up just so happened to be Frank Castle. This would lead to the two to team up to stop the Black Cullens from causing any more harm. And during this mission, Jimmy didn't kill a single person. He just couldn't bring himself to hurt anyone. But his sister, on the other hand, could bring herself to hurt people. You see, the Cullens had kidnapped Jimmy's sister, Lori, as she'd been helping Jimmy try to escape his life as the Punisher. So Lori killed her and Jimmy's mom and uncle. Upset by all of this, Jimmy ran off, and Lori became the leader of the Black Cullens, only to eventually be killed off-panel by the Punisher. Jimmy hasn't been seen in over 30 years, so I hope he was able to find that normal life he so desperately craved. As for his appearances in media, he kinda appears in the MCU. A random dude that Colleen Wing fights in Iron Fist is named James Pierce, and even goes by the name Jim or Jimmy. But other than that, he has literally nothing else in common with his comic counterpart. He's an adaptation in name only. Frankencastle. When Norman Osborn took control over S.H.I.E.L.D. in the aftermath of Secret Invasion, Frank wasn't super thrilled about that, so he attempted to assassinate Norman. His efforts failed though, and he'd eventually be tracked out and killed by Akihiro, the son of Wolverine, after Norman ordered him to do so. But Frank didn't stay dead for long. Man-Thing and some mole people showed up and grabbed his corpse. They then brought his corpse to the Legion of Monsters. This is a group of monsters and other supernatural-themed characters who hang out and protect monsters from monster hunters and any other force that wants to harm them. The Legion of Monsters needed Frank, so the Legion revived Frank as a Frankenstein-like monster called Frankencastle. Frank wasn't super thrilled about any of this, so he bailed, only to be brought back to the monster's headquarters by the Legion. Turns out the Legion needs his help in taking out the villain Hellsguard, who led a group of samurai-like warriors who hunted down monsters for being a sin against God. It's here that Hellsguard's forces attacked the monsters, and in the battle, a mole person kid was killed, which really ticked off Frankencastle. So Frank decided, why not, and he joined up with the monsters to defeat Hellsguard. After this, Frank left the group and tracked down Wolverine's son, because, well, Frank's all about revenge. So he traveled to Japan and tried to kill Akihiro, and he very nearly did, if not for Wolverine showing up to stop him. Only for Wolverine and Frankencastle to then team up when Akihiro went Goofy mode. Frank would then return to the Legion of Monsters, where Elsa Bloodstone would use the Bloodstone to turn Frank back to normal. As for Frankencastle's appearances in media, he's appeared in Marvel Avengers Academy, Marvel Rivals, and Contest of Champions. The Punishers. First appearing in Guardians of the Galaxy issue 17, released in August of 1991, the Punishers is a gang inspired by the Punisher, who existed in a universe in which War of the Worlds happened. Now, yes, War of the Worlds technically also happened in Earth 616 in the early 20th century, but they lost there. In this universe, after that, the Martians returned almost a century later and won pretty easily in just a single night, known as the One Night War. Though there'd still be resistance groups who would fight back, and the Punisher was in one of these groups, but he would eventually fall in battle. In 2075, the Martians abandoned Earth after they used up all of Earth's natural resources, and in the aftermath of them leaving, humanity was now free. But Earth was now a post-apocalyptic wasteland, so life was pretty difficult for everyone. 1,000 years later, in the 31st century, Dr. Doom was still alive, having transplanted his brain into Wolverine's skeleton so he could hypothetically live forever. And of course, he wished to rule over the remains of humanity, so he created a bunch of VR devices that people became addicted to. So addicted, in fact, that entire generations were dying because they were too glued to their VR devices. But a lot of younger people saw through Doom's scheme and started fighting each other. This resulted in the creation of a ton of gangs, one of which being the Punishers, a group inspired by records of the Punisher's actions during the 20th and 21st centuries. The Punishers would become Doom's enforcers in New York City, and were armed with laser guns, small-flying combat skiffs, and a giant tank known as the Ultimate Punisher. And they needed this equipment, as they were constantly fighting off other gangs. They also battled the Guardians of the Galaxy, who were trying to free humanity from Doom's control. And when the Guardians were eventually successful, the Punishers began to die off, literally, as those who weren't arrested or retired were killed. Jigsaw becomes the Punisher. So Jigsaw is Punisher's most frequent foe in Earth 616, and thus he's done some pretty crazy stuff to get at Frank. Take, for instance, the many different times he pretended to be the Punisher. The first time he did this was in Punisher issue 4, released in January of 1986. Though this wasn't Jigsaw acting on his own accord. This was part of a storyline that I'll talk about in the next tier, but what you need to know right now is that Jigsaw was in prison and brainwashed by a group called Trust into becoming a member of their punishment squad. Basically, a team of criminals forced to dress up like the Punisher and work for them, battling other criminals. But not only did they dress up like the Punisher, the brainwashing made them all think that they were the real Punisher. Jigsaw would break free of this brainwashing when he came face to face with the actual Punisher, which led to him being sent back to jail. The next time that Jigsaw became the Punisher was in Punisher issue 2, released in October of 1995. Around this time, the public was led to believe that Frank Castle had been executed by the NYPD, and Jigsaw wasn't thrilled about this info, as he wanted to be the one who killed Frank. So in retaliation, he dresses up in a Punisher costume and starts to go around killing any police officer, judge, doctor, and prison guard involved in Frank's execution. Frank would eventually show up to stop Jigsaw, which made Billy really happy, as he now still had a chance to kill him. So, did he? No, Frank and Daredevil pretty easily took care of him. The next time that Jigsaw became the Punisher happened in Punisher War Journal issue 18, released in April of 2008. This was part of a scheme by Jigsaw to frame the Punisher for crimes that he didn't commit, and also just to mess with him. He had a dude named Ian brainwashed into becoming his very own Punisher, and sent him out on massacres across NYC. And through his connections with some corrupt cops, the public was led to believe that these attacks were done by the real Punisher. So he then hired some assassins from the Hand to kill the Punisher. But when the Hand assassins failed, he hired the Wrecking Crew to kill the Punisher. But when they failed, he went after Frank himself, only to then get defeated pretty quickly. By the way, throughout all of this, Jigsaw wore a homemade Punisher costume. After this, he'd be arrested by S.H.I.E.L.D. and executed by Lynn Michaels. But of course, he somehow survived that, and would return to dress up like Frank once again in Punisher issue 6, released in January of 2019. This time, he pretended to be the Punisher while he worked under Hydra. As the Punisher, he killed a whole bunch of civilians before letting himself get arrested. He was then sentenced to death, only for him to be then swapped out with another criminal who would later receive that execution that Jigsaw was sentenced to. This was all part of Helmut Zemo's plan to turn the Punisher into an assassin for Hydra. Basically, ruin his reputation completely and make him go even more insane while he was imprisoned by Hydra. But Frank would escape and defeat Zemo, Jigsaw, and everyone else working with them. Batman Punisher. Releasing from June to October of 1994, and written by Denny O'Neil and Chuck Dixon, the Batman Punisher duology is a two-part miniseries in which Punisher travels to Gotham City, where he comes face-to-face with two different Batmen. The story begins during the time in which Batman is no longer Bruce Wayne, but instead Jean-Paul Valley. Batman and Punisher meet up when Punisher shows up at a church in Gotham City that Jigsaw has turned into a hideout. Or at least the Punisher thinks he has. In actuality, Jigsaw used the church as a trap. And after escaping the trap, that's when the two meet. Turns out Batman's searching for Jigsaw due to him working with a man named Cass Reimer, who stole a chemical from the Pentagon that can ignite water into fire when it comes into contact with it. With the plan being that Jigsaw and him would place the chemical in Gotham City's water reserves, destroying them, and Jigsaw's construction company would then make repairs, giving Jigsaw and Co. a whole bunch of money. They were also trying to sell some of the chemical to a Russian criminal group for a quick buck. Luckily, Batman and Punisher are able to defeat the villains, but this team-up led to some issues because Batman doesn't kill, but Punisher, well, that's all he does. So when he tries to kill Jigsaw, Batman saves him. Punisher and Batman then fight, while Jigsaw escapes with the help of the Joker. So Jigsaw and Joker escape, Reimer is arrested, and the two heroes go their separate ways. And that's when the second installment starts up, with Punisher returning to Gotham City. And this time, Bruce Wayne is back to being Batman. Punisher returned to Gotham to once again look for Jigsaw, but this time, Batman isn't super interested in working with Frank. And just as Frank is about to execute a criminal, Batman stops him and the two fight. The fight ends with the two going their separate ways, while the criminal gets away. Well, he gets away for a second. When he returns to Jigsaw and Joker, Joker kills him. Meanwhile, Batman and Punisher continue their searches for the criminals with their sidekicks, Robin and Micro. The two sides both find Jigsaw and Joker and go to confront them at the same time. Batman defeats Jigsaw while Punisher defeats Joker, and he's about to kill Joker before Batman stops him. The two heroes once again fight, resulting in Batman defeating Punisher, but not having him arrested. He just tells him to never come back to Gotham. Now what's interesting about this crossover is that while it obviously isn't canon to either the main Marvel or DC universes, the events of at least the second part of the story did happen in the mainline DC universe, just not with the Punisher, but instead a different violent vigilante that's legally distinct from the Punisher. We know this because the events of the story are briefly mentioned in Nightwing issue 44, released in June 2000. Punisher gets convinced to Avengers Endgame himself and is reborn as an angel. In Punisher Issue 1, released in September of 1998, Punisher Avengers Endgames himself. Okay, let's back up a second. What if I were to tell you that Frank's family being killed by the mob wasn't a result of Frank's family witnessing a crime, but instead was part of a demon's scheme to raise an army of demons to battle a bunch of Hell Lords? Yes, it was retconned that a demon known as Oliver was responsible for Frank's family's deaths. Oliver wasn't very popular amongst his fellow Hell Lords, due to him being a bit of a trickster, so he was cast out from Hell and reborn on Earth as a human named Frank Costa. He had no memories of his life as a demon until he started to kill people, and upon remembering who he was, he came up with a scheme to gather an army to take revenge on the Hell Lords. He had Frank's family killed, which in turn created the Punisher, and every single person that the Punisher killed would then join Oliver's demonic army in Hell. Oliver would eventually decide that Punisher wasn't needed anymore, and so sent demons back to Earth in order to convince Frank to Avengers Endgame himself, which he did. But then an angel named Gadriel showed up and resurrected Frank, giving him a whole bunch of heavenly powers. Gadriel did this in order to have Punisher help him defend these Hell Lords, since Oliver wasn't gonna just stop at the Hell Lords, he was eventually gonna go after Heaven as well. So Gadriel and Punisher worked together to stop Oliver's demonic army, and the story came to an end when the energy created from this literal holy war created a rift in space and time, which summoned a Lovecraftian-like monster who killed Oliver. Gadriel then sacrificed his life to close the rift, and the story was over. But Frank still had his heavenly powers for a bit, and worked alongside Wolverine to battle a mutant named Revelation, whose mutant ability was literally a death aura, meaning that if you were anywhere near her, you would die. And shortly after this, Frank lost his heavenly abilities, and went back to being the normal old Punisher for a while. As for Frank's powers, when he was an ally of Heaven, he had superhuman healing, immortality, and the ability to create angelic guns.
We'll be right back to Marvel's Avengers Ultron Revolution on Disney XD.
There's new action in the universe from Marvel superheroes.
Spider-Man! Dr. Octopus!
I'll bend Dr. Octopus in half, Captain America. No time, Hawk. My shield will cut him down to size.
Meet your doom, Surfer.
Not so fast, Doom. Take him, Surfer.
Marvel superheroes are each sold separately.
Now back to Marvel's Avengers Ultron Revolution on Disney XD.
Prehistoric Punisher. Only appearing in Marvel Year in Review Issue 5, released in December of 1993, in this reality, Earth 27-135, a caveman who's never named but is very obviously designed after Frank Castle, lived his life in peace with his caveman family. That was until a dinosaur named Big Greenie ate his family. So Caveman Frank declared that he was going to get revenge on the dinosaur, and that's where the story ends. It was a joke story, so there's not really much to it. Though with that being said, there's actually another prehistoric Punisher, only appearing in Excalibur issue 49, released in February of 1992. The Punosaur hails from Earth 99-476, and is most likely from a universe in which dinosaurs never went extinct, as he seems to be a highly evolved humanoid theropod dinosaur. We know almost nothing else about him, outside of the fact that he was an enemy of Dino Steel, who was a Pteranodon Iron Man. These two briefly were transported to Earth 616, when the villain Necrom was messing around with the multiverse. The dead can't be distracted. So Marvel and DC fan films are pretty common. Sometimes you get really good stuff like Batman Dead End, Batman Dying is Easy, or The Green Goblin's Last Stand. But sometimes you get stuff like Spider-Man Lotus and Superman Solar.
They're going to have you end our wars and meet with our politicians. I won't be a pawn in politics or a tool for anyone's agenda. I'm here to do what's right.
And who defines what is right?
Well, I do, Miss Lane.
But regardless of quality, they get released, as they're non-profit fan films. Though sadly, The Punisher, The Dead Can't Be Distracted is not like these other fan films. Planned for a release in 2013 and directed by Mike Pecci, this fan film was meant to adapt the 2011 Punisher series, aka The Punisher run with Rachel Cole and The Exchange. Everything seemed to be going good. That was until the film began to enter post-production, as that's when Marvel stepped in and sent them a cease and desist. This was because Marvel was getting worried that people would get confused upon seeing posters for the film and believe that it's an official product. Mike Pecci attempted to negotiate with Marvel and even offered them the final say in what goes into the final cut of the film, but Marvel weren't budging and even threatened a lawsuit if they continued production. So the film was cancelled, despite the entire thing being complete. While Mike Pecci still wants to release the film, legally he can't, so unless there's a leak, I don't think we're ever gonna see this film. Should also mention that the Punisher in this film was going to be played by Nick Apostolides, aka Leon Kennedy's modern voice actor. Rejected MCU Punisher sequel film. After Netflix cleaned house of their MCU Marvel shows, everyone and their mother was begging for Daredevil to be continued. Luckily, we would get a continuation with what's basically just a 4th, 5th, and 6th season. But it took some time, and some smaller appearances in She-Hulk, Spider-Man, Hawkeye, and Echo to get there, meaning that for Daredevil, fans had to wait from October 2018 to March 2025 for a continuation, nearly 7 years. For other shows, like Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, it took even longer, with them not returning to screens until April and May 2026. And Iron Fist had to wait until March of 2027. But Punisher, on the other hand, very nearly got a direct continuation only a year after its cancellation. Shortly after its cancellation, Adam G. Simon approached Marvel Studios and pitched a full-on Punisher film that would serve as a sequel to the Netflix series. The film would have Punisher believing that Nick Fury was responsible for most of the damage done to the world post the Avengers, as he was the one who brought the team together in the first place. So he hunts down Nick Fury, only to find out by the end of Act 1 that he was being tricked by somebody into thinking that Fury was the one to blame. So the rest of the film would deal with Punisher and Nick Fury working together to find out who set the Punisher up. And to make matters worse, whoever this person is has convinced several heroes and villains that Punisher has to die. So the film would have seen Punisher and Fury battling and running from a ton of heroes and villains, with Adam G. Simon describing the film as a mix between 310 to Yuma, Winter Soldier, and Leon the Professional. Unfortunately, Marvel Studios declined the pitch, most likely due to cost concerns, timeline issues, the fact that they still didn't know if they wanted to make the MCU and Netflix shows hard canon, and the fact that it was going to be a Punisher film. If you're curious as to which heroes and villains would have appeared in the film, Adam G. Simon revealed that they would have included Falcon, Black Widow, the Winter Soldier, Gnucci, and Bullseye. He doesn't mention War Machine, but I would imagine that he would show up as well, so they could do the whole Frank wearing the War Machine armor thing. Though I should point this out, Adam G. Simon actually wanted to recast Bullseye as Joel Edgerton, and Micro as either Russell Crowe or Jeffrey Wright. He also wanted Eminem to do the film's soundtrack. Punisher 2005 game controversy. Released in January of 2005 for the PS2, original Xbox, and PC, The Punisher is the definitive Punisher video game, which admittedly is not hard to beat because there's like 3 Punisher solo games. Regardless, it's a must-play for Punisher fans, and is vaguely canon to the 2004 film. Thomas Jane reprises his role as Punisher, but there's no real connections to the film outside of that fact. Anyways, this game came out at a very controversial point for video games, as this was around the time where people were claiming that video games were getting too graphic, violent, and sexual. Games like Manhunt, GTA San Andreas, and Mass Effect are other examples of games around this time getting hit with these controversies. People argued that Punisher 2005 was way too graphic and would lead to children trying to replicate the game's gruesome torture scenes in real life. In fact, these torture scenes almost gave the game an AO rating, which is the rarest kind of video game rating. It means the game is for adults only, and if you're underage, you legally cannot own it. Volition, the developers of the game, and THQ, the publishers of the game, really didn't want this rating, as very few stores sell AO titles. So they had the game's torture scenes be shown in black and white, and gave players penalties if they killed a criminal after they confessed to their crimes. This worked in the United States, but other countries required more censorship. For example, in Australia, the game couldn't be sold there unless they removed 2 entire sequences from the game, these being the Punisher dunking a head's dude in acid sequence, and the Punisher using a blowtorch on a dude's face sequence. Meanwhile, in Germany, the game was added to the country's Federal Department for Media Harmful to Young Persons list, which meant the game could barely be sold in the country. And then there's the UK, which required the game to be censored even more just to get an 18 rating. Luckily for Volition and THQ, while these controversies did hurt the game still sold really well and was received pretty positively by fans and critics alike. The Retaliator. Only appearing in Punisher War Journal issue 35, released in August of 1991, Fyodor Tesla is an actor who took up the role of the Retaliator. The Retaliator is a violent vigilante who kills criminals after his family is killed, and he wears a skull on his chest. So yeah, he's basically the legally distinct Punisher. When filming the final fight for the Retaliator film, the actor playing the film's villain was accidentally killed. While this wasn't the first person to die on set, this was a death that Tesla had a hand in, and this death hit Tesla hard, as he had some kind of mental breakdown, and he began to believe that he really was the Retaliator. That, and he was also high on cocaine. But anyways, the film needed a new stunt actor, so Frank Castle showed up to play ball. And what's funny is that he's not actually here looking for a villain or anything, he just wants to see how the film is shaping up. Though Frank quickly realizes that the film's director, C.B. Bissell, is a pretty bad dude, as literally on his first day on the job, 2 more people are killed on set due to Bissell's recklessness. Frank also discovers evidence that Bissell has been kidnapping people and torturing them to death. So, yeah, he's a pretty bad dude. So Frank investigates Bissell's home and finds a bunch of snuff films. So he tracks down Bissell to put an end to his horrific crimes, and discovers that he's not actually working alone. He's working with a man named Ace Kromberg, who's another stunt actor on the film. Before Frank can make a move, Tesla shows up in full Retaliator gear, ready to take the 2 murderers out. Only for Tesla to get killed almost immediately. But hey, at least he tried. So Frank steps in and kills Kromberg before chasing down and finishing Bissell off. And I can only imagine after all of this, the film is cancelled. Cancelled Punisher vs. Barracuda comic series. In 2020, it was announced that Ed Brisson would be writing a 5-issue-long miniseries titled Punisher vs. Barracuda. This comic was actually a fairly big deal, as this was going to be Barracuda's introduction into the main Marvel universe. Remember, Barracuda was exclusively used in the Max continuity, along with some other alternate timelines like the M&M crossover. Punisher fans were pretty hyped, but the series never ended up being released, due to 2 very big reasons. The first, and most obvious, is the fact that in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic was going on, which resulted in a ton of comics from Marvel, DC, and other companies to be cancelled or delayed for years. And then there's the second issue, which was actually the main reason why it was cancelled, and that reason was...
The Ku Klux Klan!
The comic's story was going to have Barracuda hire people from the KKK to hunt the Punisher down, all while Barracuda himself is being targeted by other white supremacist groups. And around the time of this comic's intended release, October 2020, in the real world, the Black Lives Matter movement was at an all-time high, with the George Floyd protests occurring a few months prior. So because the comic was going to feature these white supremacist groups, Marvel got cold feet and canceled the series. Gonna be honest, this is one of the worst reasons to cancel any piece of media that I've ever heard. Guys, I don't think Black Lives Matter protesters are gonna care about a comic in which Punisher kills literal Klansmen. In fact, I think they'd be pretty hyped about it. But alas, the comic was canceled, and Barracuda's introduction into Earth 616 was delayed for years. Punisher Noir. First appearing in Punisher Noir Issue 1, released in August of 2009, Frank Castelloni Jr. was just your average Italian Jewish boy living in New York City in the 1920s. So he had a really rough life as a kid. In order to survive the streets, he joined a gang and learned to fight. But when he wasn't out doing 1920s child gang stuff, he was listening to stories about the Punisher on the radio. In this universe, the Punisher was a fictional character similar to the Green Hornet, and had his stories told via the radio. Frank Jr. lived with his dad, who was a World War I veteran with a skull tattoo on his chest, and now ran a little store. But this store needed protection, so the local mob stepped in and began demanding protection money. The Castellonis were not thrilled about the mob coming in and demanding money, so they fought back. This ended exactly how you'd expect, with Francis Castelloni Sr. being murdered while Frank Jr. was out with his gang. Though in fairness to Frank Jr., he did leave his gang the very same day his dad was murked. Fueled by revenge, Frank spent the next couple of years trading to get revenge on the mob as the Punisher. First order of business was to take out those who directly killed his dad. Those being the assassins Jigsaw, who normally worked for Al Capone, Barracuda, who normally worked for Bumpy Johnson, and the Russian. The Russian actually had a history with Frank's daddy, as he'd been hired to kill Frank Sr. back in 1918, but Frank Sr. nearly killed him. They were pretty tough fights, but Frank Jr. was able to kill them, before moving on to the head of the mob, Dutch Schultz. After it was all said and done, Frank debated on continuing to punish crime as the Punisher, and thought about traveling to Chicago to pay Al Capone a visit. But that's when he saw a newspaper article talking about Mustache Man and the Third Reich. So he decided to travel to Germany to take him out. Was he successful? No, probably not. As for his appearances in media, he's only ever appeared in Marvel Future Fight. Kill Crew. So the War of the Realms event was this big event where Malekith invaded Earth, and all of Marvel's heroes had to team up to stop him. And during the war, a ton of people died, which created a whole bunch of orphans. So Punisher decided that he was going to be the guy to travel around the galaxy to get revenge for these orphans. While he starts this mission alone, he doesn't end it alone, as throughout his journey, he gathers up a team consisting of Juggernaut, Black Knight, Foggy Nelson, and Thor's goat, Tooth Gnasher. So they battled dragons, frost giants, trolls, dark elves, demons, ogres, zombies, and whatever the hell this thing is. And Punisher doesn't mess around. Not that he ever does, but he especially doesn't mess around in this series, as nothing gets him more angry than some orphan creating monsters. Especially when they're literal monsters. This all builds up to a final boss of sorts, a frost giant that Punisher faced off against during the War of the Realms event, named Cassaclaw. Frank actually soloed the dude for a while, but would eventually be defeated by the frost giant. But that frost giant literally blew up almost an entire family in front of Frank. He was basically a dead man walking, because Frank wasn't gonna stop until that dude was Studio Gonzo. Anyways, Punisher kills him, and surprisingly, nobody in the kill crew dies. Well, except for Belith, a dark elf that Punisher had captured and forced to help them navigate the cosmos. But I don't really think you can count a prisoner as part of the crew. But anyways, the overall story is extremely goofy and crazy, but it ends on a really emotional note. Upon returning to Earth, Punisher gives the sole survivor of the family that the Frost Giant had killed a photo of the Frost Giant's corpse. But Punisher realizes something. This guy isn't doing so well. and later that night, Punisher breaks into the man's home and finds him in the process of Avengers Endgaming himself. So Punisher saves him and gives him the will to keep going on, if not for him, for his wife and kid. Iron Punisher. First appearing in What If issue 28, released in June of 1991, this What If story answers the question, what if Captain America wasn't the only person given the super soldier serum during World War II? Well, he wasn't, but at the time of this comic's release, he was. In this reality, Steve is able to stop the German assassin from killing the creator of the super soldier serum, and so he's able to create an entire army of super soldiers. Basically, the entirety of the Howling Commandos get super soldiered, so they head off to Berlin and literally defeat Mustache Man and Red Skull within a day, and the war ends in 1941. But here's where things get goofy. On the way back to the United States, a German U-boat sinks Captain America's boat, and he's the only survivor. But the Captain America who returns home is not Steve Rogers. While Red Skull's original body died in Berlin, his mind was transferred into a clone of Steve, and so Steve was frozen and lost to the Atlantic Ocean, while Red Skull took his place. And as Captain America, Red Skull gained more and more power, eventually becoming the President of the United States. And he does some very bad stuff as President. For example, he has the Fantastic Four killed just as they were about to get their powers. He has Bruce Banner killed before he can become the Hulk. And he even has Peter Parker and his entire family killed before he can become Spider-Man. And it's Frank Castle who Red Skull has killing Peter. Because Frank respects Captain America so much, he doesn't really question anything he says, so he unknowingly becomes an agent of Hydra. Though this all changes one day when they go to capture Namor. Despite having the super soldier serum, Frank was defeated, so he was then given a Punisher-like Iron Man armor for round 2, and this time he beats Namor. But that's when Frank realizes that Namor has the real Captain America frozen in ice. Realizing that this was the real Captain America and that an evil clone was president, Frank immediately turned on the government and began working alongside Captain America to free the country from Red Skull. They work with other heroes, these being Namor, Sam Wilson, but this time he's Giant Man, Thor, and Wolverine, but this time he's a Wendigo named Hulk. While the team were able to kill Red Skull, Iron Punisher and the rest of the heroes died shortly afterwards, as they couldn't exactly fight an entire army of super soldiers by themselves. But now that Red Skull was gone, and the truth was revealed, the country began to heal. As for his powers, Iron Punisher had the super soldier serum, so he had superhuman strength and durability, and with the Iron Punisher suit, he could fly and had a bunch of guns and repulsor blasts built into the suit. So basically, he was a mix between Punisher, Captain America, and Iron Man. Archie Meets the Punisher. Released in August of 1994 and written by Baden Lash, Archie Meets the Punisher is exactly what it sounds like. It's a crossover between the Punisher and Archie from, well, Archie Comics. The story has Punisher taking up a job from the United States government to track down and capture a drug trafficker named Mel J, aka Red Fever, who looks a whole lot like Archie. So Punisher and Micro travel to Riverdale to find him, and upon seeing Archie just chilling out, they instantly think that he's Red, so they try and kidnap him along with Jughead. But they're not the only ones looking for Red, as some criminals from New York have also arrived in Riverdale, searching for Red so they can kill him before the government gets a hold of him and can interrogate him. So before Punisher can abduct the teenagers, he has to rescue the teens from the criminals. And when he does this, he realizes that Archie isn't actually Red, so they let him go. But they do keep an eye on him in case more criminals show up and try to abduct him. While this is all going on, Red is asked to the school dance by Veronica, who's currently ticked off at Archie, so she settles with Diet Archie. Side note, Veronica is canonically a teenager, while Red is canonically an adult. While at the dance, a dude from one of the gangs hunting down Red spots him and summons his friends to help take him out. Punisher also shows up to the dance looking for Red and tries to capture Red while beating up the gang members, but Red gets away and kidnaps Veronica. So Archie and friends team up with the Punisher to rescue her. They're successfully able to rescue Veronica, and Red gets his foot caught in a parade balloon, and he's lifted off into the air, never to be seen again. Punisher and Micro then say goodbye to Riverdale and head off to Gotham City, which technically makes this a midquel to the Batman-Punisher duology, which was being released around the same time. Although technically, this crossover is canon to the main Marvel universe, as the events of the story are mentioned in guidebooks. But at the same time, let's be real, it's probably not actually considered canon these days, and its mention in guidebooks was probably just a little joke. This comic is actually pretty important. Not really to Marvel, but to Archie Comics, as one of the most well-known aspects about Archie is the fact that the series crosses over with a ton of random franchises, like The Predator, Sharknado, Harley Quinn, Red Sonja and Vampirilla, Kiss, Jay and Silent Bob, Glee, and Batman, and this Punisher crossover was the very first one. So without it, it's possible that none of these other crossovers ever would have happened. Code Red. First appearing in Hulk issue 14, released in August of 2009, Code Red was a team of morally ambiguous characters brought together by General Ross and Doc Samson in an effort to kill Domino. You see, at this time, Red Hulk's identity was a mystery, and Domino just so happened to see who Red Hulk really was. You know, General Ross. So in order to keep this information as secretive as possible, Red Hulk gathered a team to track her down and kill her. This team consisted of Thundra, Elektra, Crimson Dynamo, Deadpool, and of course, Punisher. Red Hulk was able to get Frank's loyalty as he promised him access to a file containing the names of every single man, woman, and child in witness protection. So the team tracked her down to Hell's Kitchen, only to be met by the X-Force, who really did not care for the whole "we want to kill Domino" thing. So the two teams begin to fight, and Punisher battles X-23, and even beats her, though we don't actually see the end of the fight, we just get a confirmation that he won. But right after this fight, Doc Samson shows up and convinces Code Red to turn on Red Hulk. That's right, Samson set this whole thing up as a way to capture Red Hulk, as he believed that Red Hulk had become a liability to the government. With Red She-Hulk showing up to help, Code Red easily defeats Red Hulk, only for Thundra to reveal that she's actually loyal to Red Hulk, so she and Red Hulk battle Samson and Red She-Hulk, while Punisher and Deadpool just leave, not wanting anything else to do with the mission. By the end of the mission, Red Hulk decides to let Domino live by threatening to reveal that X-Force is led by a member of the Avengers. And seeing how people weren't super big on mutants at the moment, an Avengers member being the leader of a group of mutants going around killing people is not exactly a good look. Elektra then confronts Red Hulk and convinces him to give the former members of Code Red some rewards for their work, despite their betrayal, with the idea being that Red Hulk would be buying their loyalty. So Red Hulk gives Punisher the location to a secret S.H.I.E.L.D. weapons cache, and this eventually leads to Frank joining up with Red Hulk's incarnation of the Thunderbolts. Pitsy. First appearing in Punisher Max issue 2, released in January of 2004, Carmine Gazzara, aka Pitsy, was a member of Mafia member Nicholas Cavella's personal crew of assassins. But Cavella and crew were far too brutal for the Mafia, so they sent them into exile in Boston, only to then come crawling back to them when the Punisher was making his rounds taking out the Cesare crime family. So Cavella and crew were brought back into the fold in order to take out Punisher, but they weren't alone in the hunt for Punisher, as the CIA was also looking for Frank, as they wanted to recruit him. So while Frank was being held captive by the CIA, Cavella and crew showed up to kill him. How did they find out where the Punisher was being held? Well, Pitsy did some torture on a CIA guy's private parts in order to get the info. The attack on the CIA was a bit of a failure, as while they did kill some agents, Frank got away. And it's during this encounter that Pitsy got shot in the shoulder, but he wasn't out of the fight. Oh no. Cavella quickly found out where Frank and Micro were hiding and sent Pitsy in along with a whole bunch of other gangsters to kill them. And it's during this fight between Pitsy and Punisher that Pitsy went from a nothing side character to an actual demon. Punisher absolutely beats the crap out of him, but no matter how many times he breaks this dude's body, Pitsy keeps getting back up. And during their fight, Pitsy shoots Punisher with a shotgun, which completely obliterates one of Frank's ribs. Pitsy then tries to reach into the bullet wound and rip out Frank's lung. Also during their fight, Pitsy pops out one of his own eyes because it gets damaged. The fight comes to an end when Pitsy is thrown out of a window and falls onto a spiky fence outside, and Punisher literally jumps down and lands on his body, further pushing him into the fence. Except, I lied, because the fight isn't over, as Pitsy gets up with the spiky fence still stuck through his body, only to then get shot in the head with a shotgun, and, well, that does put him down. As for his powers, officially, Pitsy doesn't have any, but I would argue this dude has some kind of superhuman level of pain tolerance. As for his appearances in media, he's only ever appeared in Punisher Warzone. Venom Punisher. In What If issue 44, released in October of 1992, we get the answer to the question, what if the Punisher became Venom? In this universe, when Spider-Man removes the symbiote from his body in the church, Punisher was also there, and upon seeing him, the symbiote just knew that it had to bond with him. Initially being a bit freaked out by the goo monster that just grabbed him, Punisher quickly came around to the suit, as it made him pretty powerful. So he started going on a killing spree, killing small-time bad guys like the Aspirin Killer, more on him later, and the Skid Row Slasher. But he also killed bigger threats like Kingpin and Tombstone. Watching this rampage unfold, the heroes of New York tried to stop him, since most of them weren't super thrilled about killing people. So Spider-Man, Daredevil, and Moon Knight joined forces to try and stop him. And while they put up a pretty good fight, Punisher Venom was just far too powerful for them. And it seemed that Venom was also too powerful for even Frank, as Venom was quickly taking over Frank's mind and body. But luckily, Frank put a stop to this by not defeating the symbiote, not removing the symbiote, but by threatening to Avengers Endgame himself. He told the suit that he would do it if he continued to try and take control over him, and since the suit really liked bonding with Punisher, it reluctantly agreed to let Frank be in control. So Frank left and the heroes were just like, well, I guess that's better. And with that, the story comes to an end. I should also note that in Venom Funeral Pyre issue 2, released in July of 1993, during a team-up mission between Punisher and Venom, Punisher actually very briefly bonds with the symbiote, as Venom attaches some of the symbiote to him in order to protect him from some criminals. Punisher gets plastic surgery to make him black. In Punisher issue 59, released in November of 1991, after getting brutally beat and sliced up by Jigsaw and his goons, Punisher is in desperate need for some surgery. And to make matters worse, he broke out of jail, so he was a wanted fugitive. So he has a former doctor named Melinda Brewer operate on him in order to fix both of his problems. But how can she fix this fugitive problem? Simple. She turned him black so that the police wouldn't recognize him. Punisher's very confused by all of this, so he leaves the bootleg dock and heads off to Chicago to lay low. But he briefly falls asleep at the wheel, which leads to some cops to pull him over, and they're not exactly a fan of him being black, and they begin to beat him while calling him racial slurs. He tries to fight back, but the sleep-deprived Punisher is no match for these cops. Luckily, Luke Cage just so happens to be driving by on his way to fix up Chicago, so he helps Frank escape the police, and the two start hanging out, with Luke Cage not realizing that he's becoming friends with the Punisher. But Frank realizes that he's dealing with Luke Cage, so he decides to not tell him his identity, and goes by the name Frank Rook. The two decide to team up to clean up the streets of Chicago, but this causes some issues between the two of them, because while Luke's cool with Frank helping, he's not exactly cool with Frank killing people. So while the two fight murderers, drug traffickers, and other bad guys, Luke is constantly reminding Frank not to kill people, but Frank doesn't really care all that much. And it's around then that Frank begins to revert back to being white. Not really sure how that works, but that's what's happening. This is where Melinda comes back into the story, as she was captured by some gangsters looking for Punisher, and she tells them that he's in Chicago. So Punisher gets captured, and Luke Cage has to save him, and it's here that Frank fully reverts back to being white, which obviously shocks the hell out of Luke, and he quickly figures out who Frank really is, the Punisher. So the story comes to an end with the two of them going their separate ways, after the Punisher threatens to kill Luke if he ever starts doing crime. So much for being friends. Tanya Adrian. First appearing in Frankencastle issue 17, released in June of 2010, Tanya Adrian is one of the few Punisher villains to survive their initial encounter with him. In her first battle with the Punisher, he literally lit her on fire, which should have killed her, but she somehow survived. A few years later, Jigsaw would approach her and offer her a job to get revenge on Frank for, lighting her on fire. So she said yes, and became an integral part in Jigsaw's latest scheme to troll the Punisher. At first, she was ordered to assassinate people that Frank was trying to get information from. After seeing her, Frank comes to the conclusion that this mysterious assassin that's been causing him so much trouble is actually his dead wife. I'll talk more about it later because it's absolutely insane, but Maria Castle had actually been resurrected once prior to her permanent resurrection, but it was extremely brief and she was burned to death almost immediately. So Jigsaw chose Tanya in order to trick Frank that his wife was still alive and now working with Jigsaw. Tanya was all in on this plan and very nearly burned Punisher alive with a flamethrower during their final fight, as Punisher couldn't bring himself to hurt his wife. But then he found out that Tanya wasn't his dead wife, so he instantly snapped and brutally killed her, all while she laughed and claimed that Frank had forgotten what his wife was really like. Space Punisher. First appearing in Space Punisher issue 1, released in July 2012, in this universe, Frank Castle and the Marvel Universe had a bit of a sci-fi twist put on them. In this reality, Frank Castle's family is killed at the orders of the Watchers, who want to kickstart the whole, Punisher thing. So they hired the Six-Fingered Hand, a group of aliens consisting of Ultron, Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Magneto, Red Skull, and the Brood Queen. As you can tell, they all got some pretty major changes done to them in this reality. Well, except for the Brood Queen, she's kinda the same for the most part. Anyways, so the Punisher goes around the galaxy hunting down the Six-Fingered Hand. His first stop was with the Brood Queen, and he killed her without much trouble. Next, he visited Barracuda, who he tortured for information on Doc Ock. After this, he tracked down each member of the Hand and killed them. He also fought some other dudes on his hunt, like the Leader, Deadpool, Sabretooth, Rhino, and a whole bunch of clones of Mustache Man that Red Skull was using as his personal army. Now, he didn't do this hunt alone. He worked alongside a robotic companion named Chip, and Chip was actually the one who killed Ultron, Magneto, Goblin, and the Leader. After all of this and the Hand were dead, it was now time to locate who hired them in the first place, that being the Watchers. And upon discovering that it was the Watchers, Punisher and Chip traveled to Avengers Planet to steal the ultimate nullifier from the Avengers, who were all psychopaths in this universe. Also aliens, because of course they're aliens. Upon stealing it, Punisher and Chip confronted the Watchers, only for Chip to be destroyed, and Frank was trapped in a fake reality, showing him living a perfect life. But Punisher easily broke through the illusion, and because the ultimate nullifier plan was a bust, he used a device created by Chip and summoned a Hulk, who ended up killing all of the Watchers. Not a great idea though, because now that the Watchers were all dead, the universe was beginning to fall apart, and Punisher was killed shortly after getting his revenge. Trust. First appearing in Punisher issue 1, released in October of 1985, Trust is a secret group made up of billionaires, millionaires, celebrities, industrialists, and ex-military members. Nobody knows who created the group, or even how far back the group goes, but what we do know is that the group was dedicated to the total annihilation of crime. Sounds like something that Frank would be pretty hyped about, but there's a bit of a problem with the group. They were an extremely corrupt group who had no issues with assassinating people and using slaves. Remember how I talked about how Jigsaw was brainwashed into believing that he was the Punisher and was made part of a group called the Punishment Squad? Well, Trust is the group who did this to Jigsaw. Trust would take criminals and completely brainwash them into being their slaves. And as their slaves, they would go out and kill other criminals. Trust was eventually made public information after Kingpin faked his death in order to have his rival gangsters killed. As now that Kingpin was supposedly dead, Trust felt safe enough to enact their plans. So they killed Kingpin's rivals, only for him to then reveal that he was still alive. And to make matters worse for Trust, throughout all of this, they were trying to get Punisher to join them and lead their punishment squad. They even supplied Punisher with a bunch of new weapons and gadgets, in hopes that that would buy his loyalty. But Punisher wasn't super interested in joining Trust, which led to Trust member Alex Alaric to try and brainwash him. This failed, and Punisher forced Alaric to reveal Trust to the public through Ben Urich. Despite now being known to the public, the group still did some secret sketchy stuff. For example, Trust were the ones responsible for funding the group VIGIL in hopes that VIGIL would kill the Punisher. They did not, and eventually VIGIL would get shut down. It's unknown if Trust is still active, as when we last saw them, their leadership was killed by the mercenary Heathen. The group hasn't been seen since 1995, so who knows if they're still around. Punisher battles the Devil. In Punisher issue 4, released in August of 1987, Punisher comes into conflict with a man named Samuel Smith, aka the Rev. He's the leader of a cult called the Church of the Saved, who began in Indiana before moving to French Guiana. Punisher's not a big fan of cults, so he tried to shut the cult down. So he infiltrated the group and earned the Rev's trust, only to then betray the group when they started talking about assassinating a US congressman and committing a mass, Kool-Aid incident. Oh yeah! So Punisher stops this, beats up the Rev, and convinces his cult to return to America and work to make the United States a better place through peaceful methods. Should note that the Church of the Saved believed that the United States was fascist, so they were planning on combating the government via violent methods, like assassinating congressmen. That, and the Rev could also heal people, so that's why the church started up. Anyways, the Rev survived his encounter with the Punisher, and decided to get revenge on him. This story began in Punisher issue 35, released in May of 1990. In order to get revenge, he summoned the demon Belasco, who he believed was the devil himself. Belasco then convinced the Rev to wipe out most of humanity and rebuild a civilization in his name. So the Rev began his new quest to annihilate the world in the name of the devil, with the help of Jigsaw, who he had work with him in order to draw out the Punisher, so that he could kill him. The Rev's plan to annihilate the human race involved creating a drug that would sterilize most of the world's population, basically creating a Children of Men situation. In order to create this drug, they needed to find a flower in Venezuela. So the two traveled there, with the Punisher right behind them. Punisher would end up killing Jigsaw and held Rev at gunpoint. He demanded Rev show him the devil that he was talking about. And so, Belasco returned, and Punisher instantly started blasting him. Belasco then came up with an idea. He wanted to test Punisher's skills, so he sent Frank into the jungle and forced the Rev to resurrect Jigsaw. He then had Jigsaw go after Punisher in order to prove that he was worthy of being Rev's second-in-command. If he failed, Punisher would be made Rev's second-in-command, as if Punisher would, work with him, but whatever. The Rev was pretty certain that Jigsaw would win, despite the fact that Jigsaw had just been literally killed by Punisher, so Belasco decided to up the stakes. If Jigsaw lost, he would take away the Rev's healing powers. But I guess he was just messing around, because Jigsaw did lose, and Belasco didn't actually remove his powers. Punisher then tracked down the Rev and killed him, before he could then begin distributing the sterilization drug. As for Rev's powers, he had the ability to heal people, and even bring people back from the dead. He could even use these abilities on himself, and he showed this off in the story by chopping off his own limbs, and then regrowing them in order to prove his loyalty to Belasco, who he believed to be the devil.
We'll be right back to Marvel's Avengers, Ultron Revolution on Disney XD.
I got claws. I can use them.
Who said that?
Mutants must rule.
Did he say that?
Optic blast fire.
They all said that. They all talk.
Introducing Marvel Talking Superheroes and X-Men.
Is mine.
You make sounds, too.
3 separate voice sound activators let you control what they say.
Die, Spider-Man.
And do.
I want to eat your brain. Spider sense tingling.
Marvel Talking Superheroes and X-Men. Each sold separately.
Now back to Marvel's Avengers, Ultron Revolution on Disney XD.
Punisher's Hulkbuster armor. So for a while, the Punisher was part of Red Hulk's Thunderbolts, but he would eventually decide to leave the team, and him leaving the team kickstarted the end of the group, as the leader, who was part of the group, decided to enact his plan to get revenge on Red Hulk, and most, if not all of the Thunderbolts. So he bombs Punisher's home and frames Red Hulk for the attack. Now, Leader knew that this bomb wouldn't kill Frank, and he also knew that Frank wouldn't just let an attempt on his life go unpunished. So Punisher started going after members of the Thunderbolts one by one, before eventually facing off against Red Hulk. And in order to do so, he uses a Hulkbuster suit that I guess he just had lying around. No, really, it's never actually explained where he got this. My best guess is that this was in the S.H.I.E.L.D. weapons cache that Red Hulk gave him at the end of the Code Red storyline. Anyways, Punisher doesn't actually do all that well against Red Hulk, and the suit is destroyed. But Punisher doesn't give up, and continues the fight on foot. And luckily for him, Red Hulk transforms back into Ross, so it's a fair fight. Punisher wins, but before he can kill Ross, the Avengers show up to stop the fight. But Ross starts freaking out, and starts fighting the Avengers, only for Elektra to show up and reveal the leader's plan. And just like that, the Thunderbolts are disbanded. Now, I said that Punisher's Hulkbuster suit was never actually explained, which it wasn't, but it has been speculated that the suit is an upgraded version of Punisher's exo armor. First appearing in Punisher issue 34, released in April of 1990, this suit was created by Micro's cousin and used by the Punisher after Micro hacked into the mercenary group, the Reavers, computers. And because the Reavers were heavily armored, when they showed up to get revenge on Micro and Punisher, Micro had his cousin give Punisher the suit for Frank to fight in. This theory seemed to be confirmed in December of 2025, when it was announced that the armor used by Punisher to fight Red Hulk was being made into a toy called Punisher's Exo Armor. But at the same time, the original Exo Armor was destroyed in its first outing, so these two suits can't be the same. And while there was a spare suit to the original created, this suit was heavily damaged and was abandoned. So I'm not sure how Frank got the remains of the spare suit. Maybe he didn't, and this newer suit was just another suit created by Micro's cousin. Anyways, the original Exo Armor came equipped with missile launchers and machine guns. The spare suit came equipped with an arm-mounted minigun and a grappling hook. And the second design that he used to fight Red Hulk had a shoulder-mounted minigun, missile launchers, and repulsor blasts. The Punisher kills Al Capone. In Punisher issue 8, released in January of 2002, in Earth 21174, Punisher was out doing his thing when he realized that his whole punishing thing wasn't working, and that in order to stop crime, he needed to stop the founder of modern crime, who he believed was Al Capone. I think Al Capone being the forefather of modern crime can be debated pretty heavily, and I'm pretty sure that killing him wouldn't actually change all that much, but whatever. So Punisher decided he needed to travel back in time to 1929 to kill Al Capone. So he got into contact with Reed Richards with the help of Nick Fury, and Reed let Punisher use his time machine to go back in time. So Frank went back to 1929, and instead of just killing Al Capone, he infiltrated his gang. So he killed a bunch of gangsters under the orders of Al Capone. But before Punisher could do his double-cross and kill Capone, Capone acts first, and has him and a bunch of his other men tied up. The other guys are killed because they in one way, shape, or form betrayed Capone at one point. But Punisher never did. Capone is only having Punisher killed because he's far too good of a killer, so he can't let him live. But Punisher breaks free and fatally injures Capone. But before he could return to the present, Capone grabs him and his men shoot the both of them. And so, the two of them die, and the present day is changed. Except, they didn't actually die, because this didn't happen. The story ends with Punisher from Earth 616 waking up from a dream. Yup, it turns out all of this was actually just a dream. But at the same time, it was given an Earth number, so while it's a dream, I guess a universe exactly like this dream exists in the multiverse. What if Frank Castle had died, but his family had lived? In What If issue 34, released in May of 1982, we get a whole bunch of short joke what ifs. And one of these joke what ifs was, what if Frank Castle had died, but his family had lived? Honestly, it's not that bad of a what-if idea. Like, maybe Frank's daughter grows up to be a Punisher-like vigilante, while his son grows up to be a more traditional superhero, and the two fight. But whatever, this is the joke issue. In this universe, after Frank Castle is killed, Maria Castle and her kids decide to become the Punisher family. So Maria starts killing people as the Punisher, and has her two children be violent vigilantes as well. She even lets her daughter smoke cigars, which is a pretty messed up thing to let your literal child do. But I guess she is having them kill people, so that's a little bit worse. They also adopted a dog named Bullets the Wonder Pup, who goes along with them and presumably kills a whole bunch of people. Chet Scully. First appearing in Punisher issue 22, released in April of 1989, Chester Scully, aka Chet Scully, is a mercenary who came into conflict with the Punisher. He did a lot of work for the Palestine Liberation Organization and spent his free time running a mercenary trading camp in Kansas. But he didn't just teach any old mercenaries. No, Chet only taught those who wanted to learn ninja techniques. He claimed that he was basically a modern-day ninja and an expert in the martial arts they used. He even lied to people and claimed that a modern-day Japanese ninja had given him his blessing to teach future ninjas. In order to locate a woman named Iris Green, who had recently murdered her boyfriend, Punisher signed up for the course, as a lead into her whereabouts led him to Chet. But while Punisher was investigating, he discovered that somebody else was investigating Chet's Kansas ninja compound. That being a woman named Catherine Yakamoto, who was an actual ninja and part of the Shadow Masters, a group of ninja vigilantes who operated mostly in Japan. She had traveled to Kansas to kill Chet, as the ninja that Chet had claimed had given him his blessing was her father, and she wasn't super happy about her father's name being used to promote this fraud. So a big fight breaks out once Chet finds out that Punisher and Yakamoto are investigating him. The fight ends with Chet being killed by Yakamoto, and the trading camp is destroyed. This storyline was actually created to promote a Shadow Masters miniseries that released from June 1989 to October of the same year. It wasn't very successful, and we haven't seen the Shadow Masters since 1994. But anyways, back to Chet. Chet didn't have any powers, but he did have a terrifying looking dog, so there's that. And in case you're wondering, yes, the dog does die. As for his appearances in media, Chet's only ever appeared in the 1993 Punisher game, cancelled Punisher 2005 game sequel. Due to its great sales and reception, a sequel to the 2005 Punisher game was greenlit, with Volition returning to develop the game. Planned to be released sometime in 2007, and going by the working title of Punisher 2 Sandbox Punishment, this game was going to be extremely different from the original. Instead of it being a level-based third-person shooter, the game was going to be open world, and you'd be able to drive around and shoot from the wheel of any car in the game. Sadly, the game wasn't in development for long, as only very basic prototypes were built using the engine for the original Saints Row. It's never been stated as to why the game was cancelled, but if I had to guess, it was probably a mix between licensing problems and the controversies surrounding the original game. After all, this game was also going to include some pretty graphic executions. Aspects about this cancelled game were reworked into the original Saints Row, which was in development at the same time. Practically no information has ever been given as to what the game's plot was going to be about, but if I had to guess, it was most likely going to follow up the original and focus on Kingpin trying to get revenge on Punisher. Though luckily, we do know about a few characters that the developers had wanted to use in the game. these being Daredevil, Elektra, Black Widow, Nick Fury, Bullseye, Kingpin, Typhoid Mary, and even Deadpool. The Adjudicator. First appearing in Runaways issue 27, released in July of 2007, the Adjudicator was a violent vigilante who operated in New York City in 1907. He was a pretty bad dude, as he was part of a group called the Upward Path. This was a group of vigilantes and metahumans who decided that they really hated immigration and workers fighting for more rights. So they joined forces and cracked down on immigrants, unionizers, and anyone trying to challenge the system, as they believed that the world was perfect the way it was. We know practically nothing about this dude's history prior to his appearance in Runaways. We don't know his backstory or even his name. We just know that he's extremely religious and is essentially the Punisher of this era, as he went around killing criminals and, well, non-criminals, with a pretty big revolver. He doesn't do all that much in the story, he just works alongside the Upward Path as they do their thing in 1907 New York City, and he ends up fighting against the Runaways. To make up for the fact that there's not too much information about this dude, I'll also mention this. Right before this story, the Runaways ran into the Punisher, and he threatens to kill them, despite the Runaways being teenagers. He does this because he thinks that they're thieves working for the Kingpin, which, technically in this scenario, is true, but they're doing it for a good reason. Also, like, they're stealing. That's not like you don't kill people for stealing. So Molly Hayes, a member of the Runaways who has super strength and can hardly hold her punches due to her being a literal child, punches Frank in the guts, which presumably ruptures several of his organs and breaks several of his bones. And for the rest of the story, he stands shell-shocked while he tries to figure out what just happened. Joss Whedon wrote this story, by the way. Just thought that was worth mentioning. Thomas Jane stabbed a dude while making Punisher 2004. Mistakes happen all the time while making films and shows. Sometimes they're pretty funny, like the stormtrooper who bumps his head in A New Hope. But other times, these mistakes can be extremely serious. While filming the Russian fight scene in Punisher 2004, Thomas Jane was meant to stab WWE wrestler Kevin Nash, who played the Russian, with a prop knife. So he did what the scene required. But the problem was, somebody behind the scenes messed up, and instead of being given a prop knife, Thomas Jane was given a real butterfly knife. And so, Thomas Jane actually stabbed Kevin Nash in the collarbone with a real knife. Both actors were incredibly shocked by this incident, but luckily, the knife didn't go far enough into Nash to seriously injure him. Funny enough, Kevin Nash wasn't even mad about this, more just confused, and according to Thomas Jane, he was really cool about it and fully blamed the person in charge of the props, with Kevin Nash claiming that the dude was too busy trying to get a woman's number to make sure that Jane got a prop knife and not a real knife. After the incident, Thomas Jane sent Kevin Nash a few cases of beer, and they continued to film the movie. Carlos Cruz. First appearing in Punisher issue 97, released in October of 1994, Carlos Cruz is a former US Navy SEAL who took part in the Gulf War. After being kicked off the Navy SEALs for budget concerns, he decided that he wanted to help out his community by beating up bad guys. So he'd patrol around the neighborhood looking for bad guys to punch. And one day, he stumbled upon Micro, who was being attacked by some criminals. Upon saving Micro, the two decided to team up to fight crime. See, around this time, Micro and Punisher had a bit of a falling out, as Micro believed that Frank was going a bit too overboard and was a danger to himself and those around him. So he wanted to work with a violent vigilante who wasn't as crazy as Frank. Carlos initially wasn't super interested in Micro's offer, but then he found out that his nephew got killed by a gang called the Shining Condors. So Carlos accepted Micro's offer and became the new Punisher. So the two began to fight crime, with their first target being Rosalie Carbone, a high-level member of the Carbone crime family. And they did a pretty good job. And by pretty good job, I mean a really bad job, as Carlos fell for a double and had to track her down again. And when he finally got to her, he was shot, and forced into a fight with an assassin sent to kill her. And this fight led to Carlos and the assassin, named Hog, falling into the ocean, where he killed Hog and was forced to retreat. They were in the ocean because Carbone was on a boat trying to do a mob family merge, which is why Hog showed up, as the other family double-crossed her and tried to have her killed. So job 1 was a bit of a bust, so they went on to their second job, going after the Shining Condors. And this time, he did a pretty good job. Then came job 3, checking in on the Punisher. See, while Micro and Frank had a falling out, Micro still cared about Frank to an extent, and wanted him to get better. That, and Frank was also a danger to literally everyone around him, so he was also trying to protect the public. So he captured Frank, and was trying to condition him into being less insane. This didn't work, and when Carlos went to check up on him, Frank pretended to be dead, and then held Carlos hostage, only to then get captured again, though he would eventually escape. Carlos's next mission had him once again going after Carbone, so Carlos was sent to Las Vegas to kill her. There he worked with another vigilante named Phalix, who I'll talk about a bit later. But this mission was a complete failure, as Carbone had hired Bullseye to protect her, and Carlos was not even remotely on the same level as Bullseye. So after a fight, he retreated, only to find Micro dead. Micro had been killed by one of Frank's enemies from the past, a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent turned assassin named Stone Cold. But Carlos believed that Punisher was responsible, so he went after Frank, and this ended pretty much exactly how you think it did. Carlos and Frank fought, only for Carlos to lose. But instead of being killed by Punisher, he was killed by Stone Cold, who was also there to kill Frank. As for Carlos's appearances in media, he's appeared in Punisher No Mercy, and maybe Punisher Warzone? There's a dude named Carlos in it who's an ally to Punisher, but he's pretty different from how he is in the comics, and we don't even get his last name in the film, but I thought I'd mention him. Cancelled 1989 Punisher film sequel. Despite having its United States theatrical release cancelled, the 1989 Punisher film was released theatrically everywhere else. Anyways, it earned $30 million on a budget of $9 million, so because it was a financial success, a sequel was quickly greenlit, only for it to be quickly cancelled. You see, the reason why the film had its United States theatrical release cancelled was because of its production company, New World Entertainment, having some financial issues at the time, and these financial issues are what ultimately led to the sequel being cancelled. As in the early 1990s, New World had to sell off a bunch of their assets in order to stay afloat, with it being announced that New World's entire home video and film production side would be put on indefinite hiatus, before their film and holdings were then sold off in January of 1990. So if New World Entertainment was doing better, we probably would have gotten that second Punisher film. Because it was cancelled so early in development, basically nothing was created for the film, so there's not much else to talk about. What if Punisher became an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.? In What If issue 57, released in November of 1993, we get the answer to the question, what if Punisher joined S.H.I.E.L.D.? One day, Nick Fury decided that the Punisher would be a really great S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. So he had Punisher captured and brought to S.H.I.E.L.D. HQ, where he offered Frank a job. He also threatened to send him to prison if he declined, so Punisher didn't really have much of a choice. So Frank said yes, and he got his very own strike team, and was quickly sent out on his very first mission. He was ordered to capture the villain Yellow Claw, so that S.H.I.E.L.D. could interrogate him, so Punisher killed him instead. That's when Nick Fury quickly realized that maybe ordering the Punisher to capture a villain was a bit of a bad idea. So he then sent Punisher out on another job to take out some drug lords. Not wanting his new daddy to get mad at him, Frank decided to capture the drug lords and bring them in for interrogation. But he also destroyed all of their supplies and their compound, meaning that S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't really have much evidence against them now. So Fury punished the Punisher by demoting him and sending him to work under Dum Dum Dugan. Frank and Dugan's partnership didn't last very long, as while they were out on a mission, they were ambushed by Hydra, and Hydra killed every single member of the strike team, except for Frank, who got away. S.H.I.E.L.D. believed that he had died, as Frank didn't return back to base, and instead went into hiding, as he decided to quit S.H.I.E.L.D. So he contacted Micro and had him hack into S.H.I.E.L.D. to get every single file they had on Hydra. It's then that Frank returned to S.H.I.E.L.D., only to steal a jet. and using the files that Micro had gathered from S.H.I.E.L.D., he traveled to Hydra HQ and planned an all-out attack. Though he didn't really do all that well, as while he was able to rig the base to explode, he was also killed in the process. So, yeah, if Frank joined S.H.I.E.L.D., it just wouldn't end well for really anyone. Punisher: The End. Released in June 2004, The Punisher: The End, written by Garth Ennis, serves as a hypothetical final Punisher storyline. The story begins with Punisher having been arrested and imprisoned in New York City, and this is how he survives the nukes. Yup, a third world war breaks out, with China, Pakistan, and North Korea launching nukes at the United States, which of course triggers a nuclear war, which in turn ends the world. So Frank and some other prisoners chill in the bomb shelter for a year while the world outside burns. Punisher would eventually decide to leave the bunker and head to the remains of the World Trade Center, as he knew that there was another bomb shelter there, one that housed billionaires, tech bros, oil tycoons, senators, and generals. And Frank wants to go to that bunker because he wants to do some punishing, as he blames all of them for escalating the war on terror into a third world war, which in turn, ended the world. So he heads off to the remains of the World Trade Center, but he doesn't travel alone, as a fellow prisoner named Paris Peters joins him on his journey, only for the two of them to realize that this journey is basically a death sentence, since they emerged from their bunker way too early, so the radiation is going to kill them. They arrive at the bunker only to be tranquilized by the people inside. Though they are let inside, but the doctors in there tell them that it's far too late for them. They only have a few hours to live due to the radiation they've absorbed. But that's all the time that the Punisher needs, as he goes on a rampage throughout the bunker, killing everyone in sight. But just as he's about to kill the final few people in the bunker, they reveal that they're pretty much the last few people on Earth. There were other bunkers like this set up across the globe, but in just a single year after the nuclear war, each one of them has been destroyed by its occupants, as they'd all gone insane. They try to convince Frank to let them live, as they believe that they're the last hope for humanity, but Punisher just thinks that they'll eventually end up destroying the world again, so he kills them. Now that his mission was complete, Frank decides to get the answer to a question that he's had for well over a year now. You see, Paris claimed that he was arrested for being a con artist, but the two of them were being held in a maximum security prison, so that doesn't make sense, as a con artist wouldn't be held there. So Paris comes clean and reveals that he was arrested for being an arsonist. But not just any arsonist, he set fire to a school, which led to the death of over 24 kindergartners. So Punisher immediately kills him and then exits the bunker. As he walks through the ruined New York City, his mind begins to fracture, and he dies believing that he's on his way to see his family in Central Park. Punisher burns his family alive along with Micro's son. Remember how I said that Maria Castle had a brief resurrection prior to her permanent one? Well, in Punisher issue 10, released in October of 2009, not only does Maria Castle get resurrected, but so does Frank's two kids, Lisa and Frank Jr. Even Micro's son Louis gets resurrected. This was part of a storyline in which the villain, the Hood, aimed to get rid of the Punisher. Not by killing him, but by getting rid of the reason why he goes after people. So that means resurrecting his dead family. Well, okay, he did try and kill Punisher beforehand by sending a bunch of resurrected villains after him, but that didn't work, so he wanted to give Punisher his family back, which would not only get Punisher to quit fighting crime, but it would also mean that Frank would join him. Now, Micro was still dead at this point, so the Hood brought him back to life in order to help him kill the Punisher, and he was able to buy Micro's loyalty by promising to resurrect his son. But these resurrections came at a cost. A soul for a soul. Or a soul for 4 souls, I guess. The Hood told the two to kill George Washington Bridge, a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent with a history with Punisher. This would make Frank a murderer. Well, he already is one. But if he did this, in his eyes, he'd be no better than those he kills. The Hood was banking on Punisher and Micro joining him because of this. Punisher refused, but Micro accepted and killed Bridge. And so Punisher's family and Micro's son returned to life. only to then be immediately burned to death, as right when they came back to life, Punisher held the Hood's ally Firebrand hostage, and he ordered Firebrand, who I talked about in the Iron Man iceberg, to use his fire powers on them, because Punisher believed that they weren't his family, but instead just tricks created by the Hood. Not wanting to die, Firebrand did as he was ordered, only for Micro to freak out, and Frank to then kill Firebrand. So Punisher and the Hood fight, but the battle ends in a draw, and they go their separate ways. The story then ends with the Punisher saying that he doesn't want to undo his family's deaths, only for him to change his mind a few years later. The Nom. Releasing from September of 1986 to July in 1993, The Nom is one of the more unique Marvel comics. While Marvel is known for its superheroes, The Nom, as the name suggests, is a Vietnam War comic with extremely little to do with the wider Marvel universe. It instead follows a man named Edward Marks and his fellow soldiers in the 23rd Infantry Squad as he takes part in and witnesses major historical events from the Vietnam War. Though with that being said, because of the comic code, this was a Vietnam War story with no swearing or drug use. Also, it tried to avoid politics. Creators Doug Murray and Larry Hama, who are both Vietnam War vets, wanted to focus the series on what the average soldier saw, instead of talking about the politics surrounding the war. But the problem with that is that it's a war story. Regardless if you try and remove politics from it, they're still gonna show up here and there. But after these dozen or so issues, the series began to lose its original creative team. The original artist, Michael Golden, left the series after issue 13. Larry Hama left the series after issue 40. And finally, Doug Murray left the series after issue 51, though he would return to write issue 75. So why did Murray leave? Well, it's because, behind the scenes, there was a big debate going on about the series, as Murray was extremely against having characters from the wider Marvel Universe show up in the story. However, Larry Hama's replacement, Don Daly, really wanted to include these characters. So he went behind Murray's back and commissioned a script for the Nom from Chuck Dixon, and this script included the Punisher as a guest character. That understandably ticked Murray off, so he left the series, with Dixon replacing him. After this, the series went through a complete creative overhaul, with a cast of new characters being introduced, and the series' tone being changed to be more like a Hollywood war film. Even the comic's structure was changed. Instead of time in the Nom progressing in real time, the passage of time was now treated just like every other comic Marvel was making. Frank Castle would also guest star in 5 issues in the series. The series would come to an end in July of 1993, though a one-shot sequel titled The Punisher Invades the Nom Final Invasion was released in February of 1994, though this one-shot was actually stories intended to be told in issues 85 and 86 of the series, before the series was cancelled at issue 84. While originally set in its own continuity, it was later retconned to Earth 616, only for the series to be retconned again into another reality, Earth 85-101. Though characters from the Nom have made their way into Earth 616, like Michael Phillips, who showed up in some Punisher comics shortly after the Nom's cancellation. Outlaw. First appearing in Punisher issue 64, released in April of 1992, Nigel Higgins is the Punisher of the United Kingdom. He was directly inspired by the Punisher's war on crime to pick up his own gun and start doing some blasting. Well, that, and his family was killed by some criminals. He eventually met up with his hero once Frank traveled to the UK as part of a mission to stop Kingpin from using the English Channel Tunnel as a smuggling ground for his criminal empire. Punisher didn't really want to work with Nigel, aka Outlaw, but Nigel proved his usefulness to Frank, so the two teamed up and were able to foil Kingpin's plans. But Nigel didn't come out of this adventure without some injuries, as he got shot in the shoulder, which led to him being benched for a little while. But he would get back in the fight, only to decide that he didn't really want to be part of the fight anymore, as he was nearly killed by one of the few reoccurring Punisher villains, Rapido, a French assassin with a minigun for an arm. But this retirement didn't last long, as upon hearing the false reports about Frank's death, Nigel traveled to the United States to investigate whether or not he actually died. Taking up the name The Punisher, Nigel's investigation eventually led him to discover that Frank didn't actually die. And after this, he returned to the United Kingdom and decided to continue fighting crime as outlaw. And he once again came into conflict with Rapido, who was once again hired by a criminal to act as a guard while they tried to turn the English Channel Tunnel into a criminal smuggling route. Nigel allowed Rapido to think that he had killed him, only to then show up later with Punisher to finish the job. Nigel would then disappear from comics for over 20 years, before returning in an extremely unexpected place. Turns out, at some point in time, Punisher 2099 had plucked Nigel out from Earth 616 to take part in the Contest of Champions. So eventually, Nigel joined forces with a bunch of other champions to try and escape the contest, and to take down Maestro. And they eventually did, with Nigel stealing Maestro's ISO Spear, allowing him to use it to end the contest, and send everyone back to their own reality. Nigel's most recent appearance was during the Secret Empire event, in which he joined up with some other European heroes and created the team the Champions of Europe. This team came together to stop Hydra's empire from continuing outside of the United States. They worked together with the US Avengers, and were crucial in keeping Europe from falling to Hydra. As for Nigel's powers, he doesn't have any, but at one point he did have access to an ISO Sphere, so for a brief period of time, he was easily the most powerful person to have ever called himself the Punisher, since ISO Spheres literally let you manipulate reality. Marvel Universe vs. the Punisher. Releasing from August of 2010 to September of the same year, Marvel Universe vs. the Punisher is a 4-part miniseries written by Jonathan Marbury that takes place in a reality in which a bioweapon is unleashed upon the world that turns almost every single person in the world into psychotic cannibals. Not zombies, I need to specify that. They're not zombies. They're literally just raging cannibals. So how did this bioweapon get unleashed? Well, the Punisher accidentally released this weapon, known as Survivor 118, while taking out members of the Mafia who were trying to sell it. At first, there weren't any symptoms, but after a few months, the virus activated, and people across the globe began going crazy. Despite being the one who unleashed it, Punisher wasn't actually infected, as because he was right in front of the virus when it was released, that gave him a superdose of the virus, which essentially made him immune to it. I'm not a doctor, so you know what, sure, that works, I don't know. So Punisher worked alongside other heroes to fight the infected, but because he was the only hero immune, eventually all of his allies fell to the virus. Wanting to make amends for accidentally ending the world, Punisher decides to kill every single infected hero and villain. And he does a pretty good job at this. I mean, bro was able to kill Hulk. But things got complicated when he came into contact with Spider-Man. Turns out that Peter and Mary Jane continued their relationship, despite Mary Jane being uninfected. She was just kinda okay with Spider-Man being a cannibal. Anyways, Mary Jane had recently been kidnapped by the King of Death, aka Kingpin, so Peter asked Frank to go rescue Mary Jane, and Punisher probably would have said no if not for the fact that Peter had a bunch of non-infected survivors that he was using as, essentially, hostages. So Punisher agreed and reluctantly teamed up with some of the members of Spider-Man's cannibal tribe, these being Deadpool, Scorpion, and Black Widow. The rescue mission was initially a failure as Black Widow and Scorpion were killed, while Deadpool and Punisher were captured. Kingpin tried to get Punisher to reveal where Spider-Man was, only for Deadpool to break out of his cell and save Frank. So Punisher and Deadpool then killed Kingpin's entire tribe and rescued Mary Jane, though Punisher would also kill Deadpool. And upon returning Mary Jane to her husband, Punisher left Spidey in peace and brought the uninfected to safety, and the story came to an end. Just kidding, of course Punisher isn't gonna let Spider-Cannibal live. So he kills Spider-Man and takes all of the uninfected and brings them to safety. And that's the end of the story. Johnny Nightmare. First appearing in Punisher Nightmare issue 1, released in January of 2013, Johnny Nightmare, aka Jake Neiman, was one of the many different soldiers over the years that the United States Armed Forces tried turning into a super soldier. And just like pretty much every single attempt except for Captain America, this backfired. While Jake was given the ability to heal from just about any injury, he developed a split personality, that being Johnny Nightmare. And as Johnny Nightmare, the United States Army sent him to do some very violent and very illegal operations in Afghanistan. Eventually, Jake would return home from the war, and everything seemed like it was gonna be okay. And maybe it would have been, if not for the United States military hiring some hitmen to kill Jake and his family in order to make sure that the operations he conducted would never become public information. That, and Jake was insanely dangerous, because if he ever snapped, he would end up killing a whole bunch of people. But because of his super soldier abilities, Jake survived the attack, but his family didn't. When Punisher found out about the attack, he was extremely sympathetic, as it was very similar to his own family's deaths. So he visited Jake in the hospital, and the two decided to team up to get revenge on those who killed Jake's family. And during this revenge quest, they captured the soldier who hired the hitmen in the first place. And it's here that the Punisher and Jake learn the truth, that Jake was experimented on and sometimes snaps into Johnny Nightmare. This makes Jake snap into Johnny Nightmare, and he goes on an absolute rampage, which comes to an end with Punisher facing off against him and killing him. As for his powers, Jake was able to heal from most injuries, and this healed flesh, muscle, and bone would be tougher than before. So as he healed, the more durable he'd get. Punisher Painkiller Jane. Released in November 2000 and written by Garth Ennis, Punisher Painkiller Jane is a one-shot crossover comic between Punisher and the comic character Painkiller Jane. In this universe, Painkiller Jane is kind of a Punisher fangirl, and by fangirl, I mean self-admitted Punisher stalker. She fell in love with him the moment that she saw him threatening to kill a criminal, and after that, she began to stalk him, and eventually discovered where he lived. So she broke into his apartment and began smelling and rubbing one of Punisher's shirts. So while she hung out at his apartment, she began to fantasize about marrying and having kids with him. But while she's daydreaming, Punisher arrives home, and he's not exactly happy to see her. So she explains the situation to Frank, which just confuses him even more. He tells her that he'll now have to move somewhere else, and that she should check herself into an asylum, because nobody should fall in love with him. But she doesn't really get the message, and thinks that he's playing hard to get, so she starts to show up to all of his killings to bother him. He gets so angry with her that he eventually decides to trick her into getting on a plane heading to Alaska. Realizing that she was tricked, she jumps out of the plane and begins to hunt Punisher again. But it's pretty good that she does this, as when she finds Frank, he's about to be killed by criminals, so she saves his life. Fed up with her, but at the same time thankful that she saved him, he decides to make a deal with her. He'll bang her, but on the condition that afterwards she leaves him alone for good. She agrees, they bang, and the story ends. Punisher dresses up like Santa Claus. Because of how brutal the Punisher is, it's always a little bit weird seeing him in more cheerful situations. And what's more cheerful than Christmas? There's been several different stories where Punisher has done his thing while dressed up as Santa Claus. In Marvel Holiday Special 1992, released in November of 1992, we get a short story called In the Spirit of the Season. In the story, Punisher finds out that people are stealing from charity Santas, so he decides to dress up as a charity Santa and get to the bottom of who's doing this. So he beats up a would-be criminal and discovers where their base is. So he shows up in full Santa gear and beats up the boss's guard. He then tells the charity robber to turn himself into the police and that he won't kill him due to it being Christmas. But he refuses to turn himself in and punches Punisher, which knocks the robber out, as Frank had put on a tranquilizer-like solution so that if the robber touched him, he would get knocked out. And so, the holidays are saved. Then there's the one-shot Punisher Red Xmas, released in December of 2004. The story begins with Frank once again dressed up as a charity Santa, and when some mafia guys come by, Frank jumps into action and mows them down. Then on Christmas Day, a funeral is held for the mafia members, and the mafia widows decide to get revenge on Punisher by hiring a hitman. Enter Superia, an Italian hitwoman who specializes in torture. She accepts the job and travels to New York City and begins killing random people. She then declares that she'll keep killing unless Punisher comes to meet her. Seeing this on TV, Punisher takes the bait and shows up to fight her. At first, she refuses to give up who hired her, but she eventually gives up the info in exchange for a kiss, as she's pretty into Frank. So Frank tracks down and kills the widow who came up with the idea. He then tells the other widows to leave the country within 24 hours, or else he'll hunt them down and kill them. That, and they also have to donate all of their money to charity, and Punisher stands guard as Santa in order to make sure that they do. The last story that I'll mention is Punisher Silent Night. Released in December of 2005, the story begins with Punisher on a mission to kill a mob boss named Calvani Jr., who's been in hiding for years. He ambushes some of Jr.'s guys and discovers that he's gonna be at an orphanage on Christmas Eve. Punisher decides to get more information and tracks down another one of Jr.'s guys, this time a dude dressed as the world's grossest Santa Claus. Turns out, a rat who sold Jr. out wants a Santa Claus at a Christmas party being held at an orphanage in order to give back to the orphanage that he was raised at. So Jr. and crew are gonna show up to that orphanage and kill the rat. So Punisher forces Gross Santa to come with him to the orphanage. The two arrive by sled and reindeer, with Punisher also dressed up as Santa. Punisher tells the kids at the orphanage to build a bunch of snowmen, and once they do, he puts C4 in all of them. Punisher then confronts the rats at dinner and handcuffs him, so that he can deal with him after taking out Jr. So Jr. and his men show up, and Frank takes care of most of them. But Jr. gets away, causing Frank to hop back in the sled and chase after him, eventually forcing Jr. to crash into an icy lake, killing him. While that's all happening, the rat breaks free and kills Gross Santa, only for Punisher to return and kill him. And just like that, the holidays are saved, and the story comes to an end.
We'll be right back to Marvel's Avengers Ultron Revolution on Disney XD.
Ready. Aim. Punish. The Punisher for Nintendo. Explosive arcade action. State-of-the-art weaponry. Got the guts. The Punisher for Nintendo from LJN. Everything's a target. Even you.
Now back to Marvel's Avengers Ultron Revolution on Disney XD.
Dirty Laundry 2. In August of 2017, Adi Shankar, who is one of the creative minds behind Dirty Laundry, revealed in an interview that shortly after the release of Dirty Laundry, a sequel short entered production, only to be put on indefinite hold. Thomas Jane was set to reprise the role of Punisher, and Wayne Kramer was going to write the film. However, for whatever reason, this short never came out. The reason why it was put on indefinite hold has never been revealed, but if I had to guess, it was most likely a mix between Marvel starting to get weird about Punisher fan projects around this time, and Thomas Jane being a decently busy actor. The only other thing that we know about this short is that it was supposed to have Punisher teaming up with Lady Punisher, who would have been played by Gina Carano. I'm pretty sure that Adi Shankar was most likely referring to Lynn Michaels, but he didn't specify. All he said was Lady Punisher. Punisher meets Beavis and Butthead. In the 1990s, Beavis and Butthead were everywhere, so it's no surprise they also had a comic series. And because the comic series was published by Marvel, that meant that the writers could use certain Marvel characters for quick jokes. In the very first issue of Beavis and Butthead, released in January of 1994, there's a short story where Beavis and Butthead make fun of a Punisher comic, and imagine a reality in which the Punisher kills their school principal for holding the two after school. And because this imaginary story has a universe number, Earth 94-322, I guess there's a universe out in the Marvel multiverse where Punisher just kills people who bother Beavis and Butthead. Desmond Klein. First appearing in Punisher War Journal issue 62, released in November of 1993, when the Punisher was believed to be dead, a whole bunch of different people tried to replace him, like Lynn Michaels and Hitman Punisher, and while some of them were pretty successful at being vigilantes, some were not. Enter Desmond Klein, aka the Idiot Punisher. Upon hearing that Frank had been killed, Desmond decided to take up the mantle of Punisher in order to keep Frank's war on crime going. He wanted to do this since he really looked up to Frank. So he decided to suit up in his own homemade Punisher costume, grab some guns and a police baton, and head out to fight crime. His first encounter with criminals was against 3 dudes trying to break into cars. So he confronted them and let them know who they were dealing with. They were dealing with the Punisher. Then he slipped and fell onto the ground, and the criminals just shot him. So, yeah, rest in peace, Desmond. Mucky Foot Productions' Punisher game. While the 2005 Punisher game is often connected to the 2004 film due to Thomas Jane reprising the role, and it releasing only a year after the film, it's not an adaptation of the film. But it was originally going to be. Before Volition were given the project, Mucky Foot Productions was set to develop the game, and that's all we kinda know. There's almost no information about this game online, outside of the fact that it was going to be a proper movie tie-in game, it was going to be open world, and it was cancelled by THQ when the game was about halfway through development. During the game's development, THQ, the company who hired Mucky Foot, got a new CEO, and he wanted the Punisher game to be made by a studio owned by THQ. And since Mucky Foot Productions weren't owned by them, they cancelled the project and handed the IP over to Volition. And only a few months later, Mucky Foot Productions shut down, with multiple projects that were still in development, like Urban Chaos 2, and a Bulletproof Monk movie tie-in game being cancelled. Greg Smallwood's Midnight Suns. When people talk about who could be in a Midnight Suns project set in the MCU, people usually talk about characters like Moon Knight, Blade, Elsa Bloodstone, Werewolf by Night, Doctor Strange, Dr. Voodoo, Man-Thing, Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider, Robbie Reyes Ghost Rider, Wong, Iron Fist, Agatha Harkness's Ghost, Nico Minoru, and the Punisher. This has always been kind of funny to me, because while the Punisher has faced off against supernatural foes before, he's never been part of the Midnight Suns, nor is he usually associated with that side of the Marvel Universe. So where does this interest in the Punisher being part of the team come from? Well, besides the fact that Punisher fighting vampires is a cool concept, it probably stems from the fact that when you Google Midnight Suns, there's a comic cover for the Midnight Suns that features Punisher. While it's pretty cool, this comic doesn't actually exist. This art was created by Greg Smallwood as a pitch for a Midnight Suns comic series that, as you can see, would have featured Punisher as a member of the team. The story was going to follow Doctor Strange creating this incarnation of the Midnight Suns in order to fight Damian Hellstrom. Other characters that they would have faced off against included the Hood and Jigsaw. According to Smallwood, Marvel rejected the pitch because Smallwood didn't really pitch the series correctly, with Smallwood saying, quote, "I incorrectly assumed that the creation of books started at the bottom, but in reality, marketing or publishing often decide what books get made, and editorial is tasked with assembling the creative teams. A writer simply pitches his concept for the title and characters. I was swimming upstream and had no idea." Overkiller. First appearing in Slapstick Issue 1, released in September of 1992, the Overkiller is a man who dresses up like the Punisher and kills people, but instead of killing criminals, he hunted down mutants. He started his career as the Overkiller after missing the ending of an episode of The Wheel of Fortune, due to a breaking news segment about the X-Men interrupting it. This ticked him off so much that he decided that all mutants must die. We don't get a whole lot of Overkiller, in part because while his story does take place in Earth 616, it's a slapstick comic. Slapstick being a joke character, so the story itself was pretty silly. Overkiller believed that Slapstick was a mutant, so he tried to kill him while Slapstick was at a kid's birthday party, but Slapstick was able to beat him up, and then Spider-Man showed up to web Overkiller up so that the police could arrest him. And we haven't seen Overkiller since, and we probably will never see him again. As for his powers, Overkiller didn't have any, but he did have a mutant detecting device that allowed him to track down and locate mutants. Robot Punisher. Only appearing in Ghost Spider Annual, released in September of 2019, this Terminator-looking Punisher robot was created by the villain Arcade, whose whole thing is building traps and gadgets to kill people. His most notable death traps are called Murder Worlds, which are theme park-sized death traps. Anyways, this robot replica of the Punisher was meant to fight Spider-Man as part of a murder world. But Spider-Man never actually triggered the trap that activated it, so for years, this Terminator Punisher was just lying in wait for somebody to activate it. And it finally saw the light of day when Spider-Gwen, or Ghost Spider, showed up and accidentally activated it, along with a whole bunch of other Spider-Man-related robots, including robots based on Green Goblin, Rhino, Lizard, and Kraven. But luckily for Gwen, these robots were nowhere near as tough as the people they were replicas of, so Gwen was pretty easily able to destroy the robot Punisher. ABCD Nulls. Despite the 1989 Punisher film not getting a sequel, Dolph Lundgren, who played Frank in the film, has actually played Punisher in 2 different projects. The first is the 1989 film, but the second is in a short comedy sketch in the French comedy series ABCD Nulls, hosted by the French comedy group Les Nulls. In the sketch The Plunisher, we see a trailer for a fake film of the same name. Dolph Lundgren shows up in character, only to then start crying after hearing a woman talk about sad stuff. For English speakers like myself, this sketch is just kinda nothing. This is because the joke is a French pun, as the Plunisher is a mix between the Punisher and the French phrase for crybaby, plunitured. This sketch aired in October of 1989, shortly after the release of the film, so this is actually, technically, the last time that Dolph Lundgren played the Punisher, though I wouldn't be surprised if he had no memory of filming this. Phalanx. First appearing in Punisher Warzone Annual, Issue 1, released in June of 1993, Cord Mather was an engineer who designed a suit of armor known as the Phalanx Armor. It was created to help police officers, EMTs, and firefighters do their jobs. The suit is completely bulletproof to the point where even 50 caliber rounds can't penetrate it. Cord was pretty hyped about his suit, but his funders were even more hyped. But not for the same reasons. Turns out that the funding group that, well, funded the suit was actually made up of gangsters who wanted Cord to build a suit of armor that they could use to do various crimes. That, and they were also going to sell the suit to criminals who wanted to use it. Upon discovering what they were planning to do with the suit, Cord tried to back out of the deal, only for the criminals to threaten him and his wife and kid if he tried anything. So Cord decided to play along with the criminals, until he was told to get in the suit to do a demonstration at an auction. And upon getting in the suit, he immediately turned on the gangsters and began to kill them. And luckily for Cord, he had help from the Punisher, who just so happened to also be at the auction. So the two killed the gangsters, only for Punisher to then turn on Cord and demand the suit for himself. But Cord was able to convince Punisher to let him have the suit, and the two went their separate ways. And so Cord decided to become a violent vigilante, and in order to prevent his family from getting hurt, he broke off his marriage so that his family would stay away. A few months later, Carlos Cruz Punisher showed up to the outskirts of Las Vegas, where he ran into Cord, who was working as a mechanic. The two teamed up to go after Carbone, but ended up fighting Bullseye instead. This is where Cord would die, as while his suit of armor was pretty good against bullets and debris, it wasn't very good against direct explosions. So when Carbone's goons threw a grenade at Cord and Carlos, Cord sacrificed his life to tank the explosion in order to save Carlos. And to make matters worse for Cord, after his death, his suit was taken by Carbone's gang and given to Bullseye, who used the suit against the Punisher on a few occasions. As for his powers, Cord didn't have any, but his suit was bulletproof. Unfortunately for him, though, it wasn't explosion-proof. The Vigilante Squad. First appearing in Punisher issue 11, released in December of 2000, the Vigilante Squad is an extremely short-lived group of murderers who claimed to be vigilantes. The first member of the group is a dude who I briefly talked about earlier, that being the Holy, a priest who kills people after they confessed their sins to him. Next, there's Mr. Payback. He's got a thing against companies who commit crimes, so he takes drastic measures to make sure that they pay for their crimes. And he also has no problem killing innocent people who either get in his way or are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Payback is actually the one who started the team, as he tracked down the third and final member of the group, that being the Elite, and he convinced him to team up with him. The Elite is a white supremacist and eugenicist who goes around killing just about anyone. If you don't pick up your dog's poop, he'll kill you. If you jaywalk, he'll kill ya. If you're not white, he'll kill ya. So you know, real scum of the earth type. The two of them then met up with the Holy and figured out they all had the same inspiration, that being the Punisher. And so the Vigilante Squad was created. And when the Punisher found out about them, he tracked them down and confronted them. And it's here they asked him to lead their team. In response, Frank said, nah, and he killed them. The Aspirin Killer. First appearing in Punisher issue 10, released in April of 1988, Alfred Coppersmith was a former member of the Zum Corporation, a pharmaceutical company that produced Zumatrin pills, which, while a fake drug, is very clearly a reference to sumatriptan, which is a type of medicine for headaches and migraines. Alfred was pretty good at his job, but he wasn't super great with computers, so when the company began switching to computers for a lot of their work, Alfred didn't really know what to do, so he was eventually fired. Alfred didn't take this too well, and basically went insane. Wanting to destroy the Zum Corporation, he began to poison their pills, which led to the deaths of a whole bunch of people. He was then given the name the Aspirin Killer by the media, which probably wasn't a good idea, because in response to all of this, the Zum Corporation recalled all of their pills, and so people thought it was safe, since the Aspirin Killer only poisoned aspirin. But nope, because the Zum Corporation also made other kinds of products, like mouthwash, Alfred just began poisoning that instead. Daredevil and Punisher were both after the Aspirin Killer, with Daredevil wanting him to turn himself in, while Punisher, well... Eventually, Punisher would figure out that Alfred was the killer, so he went to go kill him. The two fought, and just as Punisher was about to execute him, Daredevil showed up to stop Punisher. Alfred repaid Daredevil by then trying to kill him. So Daredevil knocked him out and had him arrested. Matt would later represent him in court, and Alfred wouldn't actually go to jail, but not because of Matt. Alfred was released from police custody due to the fact that the evidence at Alfred's apartment was tainted, as there were weapons and other items belonging to both Alfred and Punisher lying around. And since the Punisher wasn't exactly doing interviews with the police, they couldn't figure out which items belonged to Alfred and which belonged to Frank. This was ultimately not good for Alfred, as he was killed by the Punisher shortly after being released. Honestly, Alfred's not that strange of a bad guy. I'm really only talking about him in this video because Alfred is very clearly a nod to the real-life Chicago Tylenol murders from 1982, in which 7 people were killed by poisoned bottles of Tylenol. Motormouth Remix. In the mid-1990s, Carlos Pacheco began work on a comic series for Marvel UK titled Motormouth Remix. The story was going to focus on the character Motormouth exploring different realities in the Marvel multiverse. There was going to be one reality where Steve Rogers, as Nomad, would lead a resistance group against the United States government after it was fully taken over by the Secret Empire. There would also be a universe where Reed Richards would help create Soviet super soldiers in order to fight Galactus. And then there's the universe with an alternate take on Spider-Man and the Punisher. In this reality, Spider-Man would essentially be this universe's Punisher. He fought in Vietnam, and when he returned home, his family would be killed by Green Goblin after he discovered Peter's secret identity. So he would suit back up as Spider-Man and start going on a rampage killing criminals. Punisher, on the other hand, was going to be an extremely religious man trying to stop Spider-Man from continuing his rampage. In fact, he was going to be a military priest who was also in Vietnam. Motormouth Remix was set to begin releasing in March 1994, and it probably would've if not for the fact that Marvel UK began shutting down before it was published. Cassandra Castle. Only appearing in Punisher 2099, released in September of 2004, Cassandra Castle is the daughter of the Punisher and Elektra. And since she was the daughter of Punisher, she was trained at a very early age to fight and kill. I should also mention that this universe is not the same as the main 2099 universe. It's a different one called Earth 2992. In this reality, there are only a handful of superheroes left, after the X-Men, Avengers, and Fantastic Four are all killed by a bunch of Sentinels. Anyways, Cassandra Castle spent most of her life doing Punisher stuff, and like her father before her, when she had a kid, she began to train him in the ways of being the Punisher, but she didn't start teaching him until he was a teenager. She wanted to wait until he was an adult, but upon finding out that she had terminal cancer, she had no choice but to start his training early. So they trained for months, and her son, Franklin, wasn't super happy with all of this. He understandably didn't want to kill people, which one day led to the pair being ambushed by some Sentinels. And after seeing his mom kick ass, he still was not into it. Cassandra took this pretty well and started to scream at him and forced him to continue training. But she never got to complete his training, as she eventually passed away due to the cancer. And that's where the story ends. She dies, and Franklin doesn't become the next Punisher. Instead, Franklin decides to let the Punisher die with his mom, as just like the cancer, the Punisher identity consumed and corrupted her, and it would do the same to him if he continued. Side note, they make a point to mention that Cassandra looks old, but she doesn't. She looks like she's in her, early to mid-40s? Lupe Gutierrez. Only appearing in Punisher issue 52, released in July of 1991, Lupe is one of Punisher's more messed up one-off bad guys. Not much is known about her backstory, other than the fact that she used to be a wrestler in Mexico. But this didn't make her enough money, so she retired from wrestling and moved to New York City to make it big. And by make it big, I mean murder mothers and kidnap their babies to then sell to secret rich elites. Yeah, not the best person around, to put it lightly. The story begins with her doing one of her hits. She kills the mother and takes the baby while pretending to be a taxi driver. She then makes the delivery and gets paid $10,000. She then immediately goes after another mother. At first, she tries to get her into her car, but when that doesn't work, she shoots her as she tries to run away. A guy tries to stop her, but he can't shoot her without hurting the baby, so she gets away. This is where the Punisher gets word about what's going on. At first, he suspects the first baby's father as being the one who killed the mom, as he has a history of crime and drugs. But he's innocent and just wants his kid. So Punisher then figures out who actually killed the mom and tracks Lupe down. The two fight for a bit before she retreats to the roof of her apartment. And then she threatens to throw the baby off the roof if the Punisher doesn't drop his guns. So Frank does, and the two continue their fistfight, which ends with Punisher pushing her over the side of the building, where she falls to her death. He then returns the baby to their surviving family, and then tracks down the baby that Lupe abducted at the beginning of the story. He then takes the baby and gives it back to the father, but he also threatens the father before leaving, saying that he'll come back and kill him if he does a bad job at raising the kid. The Medallion. First appearing in Punisher issue 9, released in February of 2002, the Medallion is a villain who thought he was this criminal mastermind, but in reality, no, not really. His claim to fame was scamming people using fake taxi medallions. For those that don't know, taxi medallions are essentially a permit allowing taxi drivers to operate in the United States. And they're not cheap, with some of them being worth anything from $30,000 to $700,000. So anyways, what he'd do is lease these fake taxi medallions and have the cab drivers do their thing for a bit, and then kill the driver, take the money, and take back the medallion to give to somebody else, and the cycle repeats. This was all part of the New York City taxi wars. Basically, a whole bunch of people were battling both financially and physically to control the New York City taxi industry. In fact, the medallion basically started this war. All this trouble that he was causing obviously caught the attention of the Punisher. So the medallion had his forces focus on taking Punisher out, while he thought up a scheme to get rid of him if they failed. And this is where his genius, or lack thereof, really came into play, as instead of taking time to actually plan, all Medallion did was eat, drink, and play video games. Though eventually he would come up with a scheme, but it wasn't to get rid of the Punisher. Instead, he and his gang were going to give up on the taxi industry and start banking on ambulances, as he was planning on releasing a massive plague that would make ambulances even more important. Though this plan would never happen, as Punisher tracked him down and crushed him with the Battle Cab. This was a Hummer mixed the taxi that was used by Mr. Bad Wrench, the Medallion's second-in-command. Punisher had stolen it and, well, used it to kill the Medallion. Witchblade the Punisher. Released in June 2007 and written by Ron Mars, Witchblade the Punisher is a one-shot crossover comic between the Punisher and Sarah Pizzini from the Witchblade comic series. The two came into conflict when Sarah, who's a detective by the way, is riding in a prisoner transfer truck escorting a dude named Brunt, who is going to be used to testify against the Russian Mafia. And because of this, the Russian Mafia wants this dude dead. But it's not just them that wants Brunt dead. Punisher also wants Brunt dead, since Brunt is a violent criminal. So he attacks the transfer truck and captures Brunt, Sarah, and Sarah's partner Patrick, and brings the three of them to a cabin that he's been using as a hideout. But Sarah has a trick up her sleeve, since she can access the powers of the Witchblade, which gives her a whole bunch of supernatural powers. So she breaks free, frees Patrick, and the two of them fight the Punisher in order to get Brunt to the courtroom to testify. Brunt, being an idiot, decides to get involved and fights both the Punisher and Sarah. Because her Witchblade powers would end up killing Brunt, Sarah deactivates them, only for Brunt to then take advantage of this and begin to strangle Sarah to death. So Punisher walks over to him and kills him. He also beat the crap out of Patrick, but he's still alive, unlike Brunt. Sarah and Punisher then stop fighting and begin to argue with each other over what just happened. But their argument over morals and stuff doesn't really go anywhere, so the two parties leave, and the day is... well, it's not saved, but... yeah, you know what? The day is. Yeah, it just is. Blind Joe Death. First appearing in Punisher War Journal issue 74, released in November of 1994, Blind Joe Death is an assassin who's also very old and very much blind. But his hearing was amplified, which let him operate as an assassin. It wasn't as good as, like, Daredevil's powers, but it was still pretty good. Because he's an elderly, blind assassin, nobody took reports of him seriously. Even the NYPD thought he was a myth, an urban legend. When Punisher was believed to be dead, not only were there people who wanted to become the new Punisher, but there was also a whole lot of people who wanted Punisher's War Journal for themselves, with Blind Joe being one of them. Well, the mercenary heathen was the one who wanted it, but he had hired Blind Joe to work for him and to get the journal. So Blind Joel stole a copy of the journal, which led to him being confronted by members of VIGIL. And after fighting VIGIL and being saved by Heathen, the two continued to work together to take out the knockoff Punishers running around and VIGIL. As if they were taken out, there'd be nobody left in the city to stop Heathen from becoming the most powerful mercenary in NYC. Except for, like, the 6 superheroes also operating in New York City, but I guess Bro forgot about them. Anyways, their partnership didn't last, and it was very one-sided, as Joe didn't really get anything out of this partnership outside of money. Joe would meet his end when Lynn Michaels and another Punisher knockoff named Payback showed up to save Lynn's father from Heathen and Joe, as Heathen would use Joe as a literal human shield. As for Joe's powers, he had extremely good hearing that basically acted like Diet Daredevil powers, and his cane that he used to walk around with doubled as a gun and tripled as a knife. Dean Swabrick. First appearing in Punisher issue 86, released in November of 1993, Dean Swabrick is one of the many different people who tried to take up the mantle of Punisher when Frank was believed to be dead. And I've already briefly mentioned Dean before, as he was the guy who attempted to kill Hitman Punisher after he stole a job from him. So now that you know how his story ends, let's go over how it begins. Dean was a rich elite obsessed with people thinking that he's awesome. He also may have been the nephew to Alex Alaric, that dude from Trust who was obsessed with making the Punishment Squad, but I don't think that was ever actually, completely confirmed. Anyways, when the Punisher was presumed dead, Dean saw a way to make the situation about himself, so he decided to become the new Punisher. Using a costume that he may or may not have gotten from Trust, Dean began a campaign to glorify the Punisher, which in turn would make people love Dean for continuing Frank's legacy. And before he could show off his skills as the Punisher, or to be more accurate, show off the guns and equipment that he bought, Hitman Punisher showed up and took out the very same drug den that Dean was planning on recording his assault on. Dean believed that Hitman Punisher was actually the real Punisher, which caused his campaign some issues, as you can't really turn Frank into a martyr if he's still alive. And if the Punisher is still alive, that means that Dean can't continue Frank's legacy, as he would just be a copycat at that point. So Dean and his henchmen began hunting down a Hitman Punisher, even killing members of the Black Cullens, which if you remember, was Jimmy's crime family that forced him into becoming Hitman Punisher. And so he eventually tracked Jimmy down, and was killed in self-defense by him. Should also mention that reference books and guidebooks refer to Dean's incarnation of the Punisher as the Yup Punisher. Man-Thing. The Russian is one of the most well-known reoccurring Punisher villains, despite him not lasting very long in the comics. Seriously, with the way some people talk about him, it makes him seem like he's up there with Jigsaw and Barracuda in appearances. But nope, he's only ever appeared 12 times, from September of 2000 to October of 2001. His fame most likely comes from his iconic appearance in Punisher 2004. That and the whole man-thing. After being killed by the Punisher, the Russian, or Ivan, was brought back to life in a very strange way. A man named General Krykov, who was guilty of 1,000 different war crimes and crimes against humanity, was the leader of his own PMC group, and he wanted to work with the Russian in order to kill the Punisher, since Punisher was giving him some trouble. So they took the Russian's severed head and placed it back onto his body, and then modified his body so that his skeleton was covered in metal, and his organs were replaced with plastic ones. This gave Ivan superhuman levels of strength and durability, and it also gave him breasts and periods. So this rebuilding process involved injecting Ivan with hormones, which not only gave him breasts, but also made it so that he had a menstrual cycle. And he was really cool with this, and began wearing women's clothing, but still went by male pronouns. So the Russian went after the Punisher, only for Frank to be saved by Spider-Man, and the two heroes battled him. Spider-Man also calls Ivan Ma'am-Thing, which is where that name comes from. And during the fight, Spider-Man gets knocked out, and Punisher literally uses Peter's unconscious body as a weapon. It's like Queen Besserez from Overlord the Sacred Kingdom, except way less evil. Anyways, Punisher and the Russian would fight again inside of a plane carrying a hydrogen bomb, and Punisher would ultimately win the fight and tie the Russian to the bomb and then throw the two out of the plane, and, well, the bomb would explode. So yes, Punisher has canonically killed somebody with a hydrogen bomb. And that'll do it, ladies, gentlemen, and NBs out there. That was the Punisher Iceberg at long last. As I said it in the community post, this was meant to come out earlier, but I've just had massive burnout, so here it is now, though. But if you got to this part of the video, you know, the ending, let me know you got to the end by saying, "It's punishing time." That might sound a little weird, but at the same time, it'd be very, very funny for people who don't get to the end of the video to look in the comments and there's just a bunch of "it's punishing time." Like, that's just a funny concept to me. I don't know. Anyways, I'm recording this on my birthday, May 23rd, and this and the outro and the last 4 entries of the video. So finishing this video up on my birthday, that's pretty cool. I'm 26 now, so no more health insurance or dental insurance. Wahoo! That's sick. I love the United States. It's so cool. But yeah, hope you guys have a good one. Did you guys like Punisher One Last Kill? I thought it had good action, but I'm so tired. I mean, I can make a joke about it in the video, but I'm so tired. I'm so tired of the Punisher, just like in the MCU, being like, "Oh man, should I be the Punisher? I don't know." It's just like this is like the 3rd or 4th time he's done this, and it's just like, what are we doing? Come on, what are we doing? And I've seen people be like, "Oh well, now this is the real turn. Like he's gonna be the Punisher forever now." And it's like, yeah, but they did that at the end of Daredevil season 2, and the Punisher season 1, and the Punisher season 2. So like, I don't know. But I mean, overall, it was like it was. I would give it like a 5 out of 10. Like I like the action, and I'm happy that they confirmed, because like there's a hallucination of Karen. I'm glad that was there, because that means that Curtis isn't actually dead and he can return. Because I liked Curtis in the Punisher series, so you know it'd be cool to see him come back in like an actual like role and not just like a hallucination. Also, bring back Micro. Why is it like why they just like they don't want to use Micro anymore? It's really dumb. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and this is the part of the video where I thank my members. For $5 a month, you get your name in the outro to all of my videos, and you get pretty lengthy video previews to my Iceberg videos. For example, the Punisher Iceberg, it was, what was it, like roughly 50 minutes? That's basically a video in itself. And for $7 a month, you get that and the videos early. And so, as always, a huge, and I mean huge, shout out and thank you to Maurice Deceased, Steven, Digital Medic, Adam Depp, The Mr. Train Track, Lone Thunder, Solid Fricky, Moxie, That's J, Cody Lester, Goat449, Hunter Gentle, V. Evans, Milo the Mighty, Mano, Guardian of Brooklyn, Domeshot529, Sailor Stell, Infinity Mark, Nathan Tench, Games with Toasty, The Epic Rager, Titanoboa Hunter, Super Blake Films, Spencer Estes, John McIntyre, Timorum Nile, Corvus Seraph, KB6427, Kevin Sanders, Maury Doll, Gavin Grizzle, Jose Felix, Cowboy Tuba, Joe Cyanide, Awesome Man, Wilder Diaz, Deadhead, Some Random Guy, Pitstab, Yore Mia, Daniel Vale, James Miller, Ismail IXQ8, Xenodusk, Evan Teisman, Lou Kager, JMax Air, Spurdala, Nick Jackson, Derry, Freeton, Paste, F.A. Mert, Alan Hamilton, Miley Bop, War Hero Ned, Sovereign Lupin, 00, The Haddonfield Registry, Wojtek Wachkiewicz, Redden, Jesse Bobessi, Celeste Heron, Noah, Snorzy, Jennifer, Lazy Danny, Nora, Christian Vague, Kyle Merrill, and It's Sky. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I've definitely said I've said it before, and I'll say it again multiple times in the past, but your support means the world to me. I thank you. Words will never be enough for me to properly explain how much your support means to me. So yeah, stay safe, everyone. Have a good day, and try to be happy. You know, life is the world's kind of on fire, but that doesn't mean you have to be on fire.
No. Wait.